look at these other pieces, they're all related to the college and career, but these are not required elements. These are elements that the previous boards have chosen, and we've kept those metrics.
But didn't the state incorporate some of those into their, didn't you just say the state incorporated like the go-on rate or some of these that we have been tracking into what they are tracking now?
They used to have some of those, like some of the go-on rate and information used to be required metrics. Now they're all optional. So that whole college and career template minus that 4-year cohort graduation rate, any other item we pick in this section is by choice. And so in this packet that I told you we wouldn't flip back through, but now we are going to, there's actually a whole second section in orange that is that college and career readiness and advisors. And so our college and career advisors have worked to collect the data that the board thought were the best indicators, and this has changed. It used to include SAT, it used to include, but every year the board has kind of, school board has decided if they wanted to add metrics or remove metrics. So these are kind of the ones that we've had for a few years, minus the few that were actually deleted last year. So I know it's messy, but they try to.
But without, and tell me when I ask questions, tell me if I'm off track, and we'll get to that later, that's fine. But are there any previous metrics that Nampa has followed that they're not now that you would like to see back on there? Does that make sense, that question?
I think that does make sense. I would actually say, because they removed some of them, and we removed some that weren't the most applicable last year, which was a nice change because we were tracking data that was very difficult, that didn't make a big impact in the outcome. But I would say that there aren't necessarily any that we'd add back in. SAT to us, because we require up until this point, and minus from few COVID years, we've required kids to take the SAT as a graduation requirement. And when it's that college preparedness exam, that it's not every child is college bound. I don't know that it's always such a great indicator, which is why the board has chosen to remove it.
Just track those who decide to go anyways, because if they do, they're gonna take the SAT. Yeah. So that makes sense.
So in this part, I wouldn't say there's any I would add in. We might even talk about maybe tweaking some as we get a little bit deeper into this section of the packet. So some of the elements, interestingly enough, one of the elements we removed last year is that used to be a required metric from the state on the go-on rate is that those in a cohort model, so just like the graduation cohort model, they used to require that we report which of those kids in that cohort applied into a 2 or 4 year institute. Higher education institute in the fall immediately after high school graduation. In that fall, we have a lot of kids who take a gap semester or gap year, and that was a rough metric for us that you'll see it's a continuing trend here too. And so last year, the board decided to really look at that anytime in that first year after high school graduation or anytime those 2 years. And so I left the data on here so you could still see it, but those were the 2 metrics the board asked us to keep last year.
Just to clarify, I needed to also, so if someone went on a mission or someone joined the military, that did not count in that.
It does not count in that, but our 2-year plan was that we hoped then we could capture more kids who maybe returned from a mission and enrolled or used any of their GI Bill benefits.
How in the heck do you capture that though after 2 years? I mean, your travel budget must be huge and you're just like chasing these kids down.
So luckily the state actually helps cover the cost of the National Student Clearinghouse, which works with every 2 and 4 year public university. Private universities have to opt into it, so not all private universities are included in that.
What about in Idaho? It's like BYU Idaho. Do you know if they
opted in? That is definitely an opt-in, yes. Yeah. I get to see how many of our
students choose that. Because there's a lot, I'm sure, that are going over.
Yeah. NNU, another one where we have a high enrollment rate, they've opted into that. And so that helps. That doesn't mean that we capture every kid, but it actually then does the national search for us instead of us having to try and actually make sure that every student enrolled in every college they said they were going to. So that helps out a lot. And so as you look at this graph, I do want to help you see that we want to look at the last few years of trend data. And if we, the top set of numbers, which follows that percent of college students enrolled in any time during the first 2 years after college graduation. Those are those numbers that run across the top. We were at 44% with our cohort 2018, so that gives us 19 and 20 to have enrolled at any time in a college. Then we dropped down to 42% for the 2019 cohort, and we dropped down to 41% a smaller drop, but still saw that drop of enrolling in that 2 or 4 year institution. Interestingly, if you look down below, you see that we maintained our 38% that over 1920 for those kids who enrolled at any time during that first year after high school graduation. But we saw a significant drop in 2021 with just 31% of our kids enrolling at some time that first year after high school graduation, which was a pretty big drop compared to when being able to stay kind of stagnant. But we see that it's been a trend line going in that direction. Not all trade schools are a 2 or a 4 year university, right? And so that's part of where we have seen, we do think some of our kids are enrolling in programs like Lineman's College, which wouldn't hit that 2 or 4 or cosmetology yet. But just to kind of help see that. And then our fall immediately after is also another indicator that might tell us we're going to continue to see that trend. When you see that we dropped from 35%, so that fall, that means they had a summer and they went right into college of some kind in that 2 or 4. We went from 35% in 2019, just 1% drop in 2020, and then we saw that larger 5% drop into 2021. So I thought it was important to keep that fall immediately after, so it might help inform how we set a goal for that, for our other 2 metrics in there as you look at those going forward.
This document is not intended to analyze why the drop from 34 to 29, it's just to show us the data.
Yeah.
Because my question is like, what the heck's going on? That's a different discussion for another time though, right?
Yeah. And the causes behind it, we don't necessarily explore in here. We just need that data to set a goal going forward for what we would do a year from now. With that, so that's part of those pieces was looking at go on rate information. Some other indicators that were important to our college and career advisors, the administration and the board in the past few years, is that down in table 2 there on page 2. It's that number of students earning industry certification. We are such a fortunate district that we have a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Robust, thank you, robust.
Yeah, because it is, it's a robust, we have a really, yeah.
Yes, thank you, that was a great word. CTE program, which means that our kids are actually earning industry certifications while they're in high school, right? They're earning different Microsoft business certificates so that they're able to enter into the workforce with those pieces. We have kids doing welding certificates and all just a broad, our 22 pathways.
Phenomenal, yeah.
And so we have so many students who step into that. And as we look at that, this really is the number of students earning industry certification. A really interesting component that we've talked about, should we change this, is how many of those 302 kids this year earned multiple certificates. Maybe they earned 7 Microsoft certificates, but this just counts the number of students that earn at least 1 or more industry certifications.
Because don't they come out now fully as a,
Intern?
No, not even just that, but like even in dental, aren't they coming out already assistants? Associates,
Can
right?
be.
Can be, like they can complete it to the point that they're already coming out and going straight to work, right?
Yeah, they can if they finish that whole
If they finish that whole cycle.
So a decision that you're looking from the board is maybe looking at, or is this just something the staff would change, whether it's unique students earning a certification or the number of certifications that are being earned?
Yeah.
Is that something
Yeah,
that
we
we
could
need to decide here? or-
Yeah,
Okay.
the board could decide if they want to have maybe the number of students who are earning one more could be included in that.
And then one of the next element is really looking at that associate's degree, which is they've completed a 2-year associate's degree well in high school, right? So they're graduating with that certificate. When we put this goal into place a few years ago, so when you asked me about adding some, this might be one we consider removing that component. And the only reason being, when we started this under advanced opportunities, they gave our students enough money in advanced opportunities that they could actually pay for all of those credits with that advanced opportunities money. Since then, they've allowed kids to use advanced opportunities money for a number of different things that aren't just those dual credit courses. And then on top of it, they also increased the cost of credits. So even for a kid to be able to do this, they would have to have money out of pocket to get enough credits to get that associate's degree. And we've also seen that some of our kids who do it just as a point of pride, right, where they want to pay that extra money, are also taking credits just to get the associate's degree that don't necessarily get all of their generals and prepare them to not have to. So they're taking extra college classes to get the associates that aren't just those general course requirements. And so as we were talking with college and career advisors, they said, you know, if we can keep that, but it isn't necessarily something we push for kids to do, is to get that associate's degree, because it costs money out of pocket. And so just being mindful of that if we want to keep that.
When did that change?
So this last school year is the first year where the credits cost more than what they're given in the advanced opportunities bucket.
Because that's the, they like driver's education, driver's
Yeah.
training, things like that.
Which won't do
That's not really
the associates
an
now.
associate.
Yeah. But then those credits also cost more now than what's covered in the advanced opportunities, and so it's balancing that out. So that may be
And likely
something.
will continue to increase.
And yes, very
Right.
true. Yes,
Yeah.
very true. So that's just one to be mindful of, because again, that's not necessarily a metric that every student can meet with what that's appropriate for them to tackle that. So the other component then is the number of dual credit courses students enroll in is tracked through the Advanced Opportunities Portal. And you will see that we obviously have that COVID impact that we saw in that 2020 to 2021. But we did see an increase this year in 2022 in the number of courses enrolled by our kids, but we're not back up to that pre-pandemic level. And I just want to one more time say dual credit courses. There's a chance this number could also be impacted because we're paying for things like driver's ed and other things that aren't dual credit out of that adjustment.
I might be speaking out of turn on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking at Chrissy and Greg, but with the advanced opportunities policy on the agenda, is that something that might conflict with these goals, if we set these goals? Now, we wouldn't be approving this SIP plan until,
Oh, no, because these are your local determined goals. These aren't the state required goals. These are your local determined. And all these are indicating is that you guys have you want to utilize your advanced opportunity money, right? And you want to provide advanced opportunities for students. And I think you want to increase.
but the goals.
It won't affect the policy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think the policy would be affected.
It shouldn't be.
Or if the policy changed, would it affect these, vice versa? I don't know. I know that's
Yeah,
a
it
very
probably
premature
varies
question.
yeah, it would probably vary to the degree of what the policy would change. Yeah, I don't know if I could answer that there tonight without knowing.
It shouldn't though, because the policy shouldn't indicate any of the metrics.
It shouldn't. And,
But
and I don't think we'd pass a policy to see that would limit the student's ability to use their advanced opportunities money to earn the credits, right? So, I mean, that's where.
And if it does, I believe we could actually make it better.
I think you're going to anyway, that the state provides the information you're supposed to.
Unless we've done a good enough job here, and then we might be okay. Okay, so if you turn the page, I'd love to say we were done, but we really love our college and career advising metrics. And so there's one more set of table data to talk through. And this has to do with our students doing learning plans. And they create them in 8th grade, and they create and review them in 8th grade. And then we got to pilot it for the state this last school year, where we're actually going to have an electronic portfolio, so the kids can actually go back to their plan from the year before, stored in the computer system, rather than having to be like, what did my learning plan say last year? It's kind of exciting, and actually look forward. And this is, you may remember this from your time in school, but did you guys ever take different aptitude or what you might want to do when you grow up, different things like that to help you find that career path that might interest you? This has to do with that, and it really is to help them explore what they might need to take classes in high school that would help them prepare for those dual credits and other things, and then also help them as they're selecting that post-high school path. And so you can see that in 2019, back before we switched to our new system, we had really high participation in our 8th through 12th grade. Our seniors were maybe less excited to be a part of that career planning review that last year of school. And then 2020, we do a large amount of that learning plan review in the spring, and you might remember that in that particular year, we didn't have the last quarter in person, and so kids, that's why that IC is there for incomplete data. And then in 2021, you kind of see that was another unique year, so we didn't quite get where we wanted to, but we were aiming high as we went into 2022, and you'll see that we saw some good growth there with 97% of our 8th graders starting a plan and creating it. Our 10th graders were a little lower than that 82%, and just our college and career advisors are really looking at how we can help take that pilot that'll now be pushed out statewide, and so that'll help our kids be more successful to not have to recreate and revisit some of those things they've done a year before.
Is that 32%? Is that a typo?
I wish it was. No, our 8th graders that year was a tough road to get our college and career advisors in there because they were trying to help our kids navigate the waters of applying for college in the midst of COVID, and so it was a more unique time in the world.
It's an anomaly then.
An anomaly.
It is.
That's why they made up for it in
COVID
2022.
anomaly. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, looks great. You go from 32% to 97%.
Well, and that cohort of kids went up to 91%. So we
Yeah,
felt,
that's
I felt a lot better that we caught them on that next step of that plan. So those are all the metrics that are required, and then all the pieces that were chosen. And what I did for you on the bottom of page 3 of your packet is this table is really supposed to help you understand this little document that we're completing and have to submit to the state. And so you'll see that first column is where our performance was in 2021. Please note, because this includes grad rate, that those cohorts are 2020 cohorts that hopefully I labeled them all so it makes sense. Then we had the performance target that we set, so that's exactly what this whole first column is on this document, is what did we set as our target for 2022. Then I wanted you to see, and I put a little highlighter there in case you needed it to help you see that, but that third column is the actual NSD performance in 2022. So what did the end of the school year look like for us in those areas? And then the state of Idaho performance, whenever we have that, when you have a lot of locally chosen metrics, you'll see a lot of NAs in the state column. And so, because those are ones that we chose locally to really focus in on. And then that last column you may want to highlight is our NST performance target for 2023. And these are ones that the administration put together to give maybe a suggestion. It does not have to be the metrics or the goal that you choose, but we thought it might help you to see where we came up with that and kind of give you an idea as a board how we might select those pieces.
So, and thank you for that explanation, because I was going to ask about that. But the question further on that is how do you get to that 78.2? I mean, 0.2 is pretty specific. Obviously, it seems like I'm not a math whiz, but it seems, and thank goodness Mandy's not here to call me out on this, but it seems like there's a formula involved with getting to that 78.2. Obviously, we didn't hit the 81%, which was the target for 2022. So do you drop, when you don't hit that target, do you just plug everything into the formula and drop that target down to, I don't know, how do you guys get to that point?
Such a great question. And as we talked through how we might go about doing this, we really wanted to look at on where we could, what it would take to close the gap with the state within 3 years, right? Because we know that we need to close that learning gap, get back up to where the state performance is, and hopefully above the state performance again, especially in the grad rate metric.
We're 3% behind the state right now.
So we added, 3.1. So we added, it would take 1% growth a year to get caught up in 3 years to that state. And so we made it 1.1 this first year. And you may or may not get that, but that's how we figured it out, was if it took us 3 years to close the gap with the state, what would it take for us to grow in a year? So we took that 1.1, added it to the 77 point, or I guess 1 point, and added it, because I knew we wouldn't make the 1.1 this year. Sorry, we debated that one.
And to make it
Reality is reality, right?
It's reality.
so that the state goals, so if you look at the statewide goals, their average growth is 1% and a max of 3. They never go over that because they want it to be reasonable and achievable. So even what you said, it was 1 point.
It's actually just 1%.
And that's very reasonable, and that's also what makes sure you're hitting that, because like I know everyone's like, oh, is 1% high enough?
Well,
It really is.
But looking at the numbers, because 1%, people will go, 1%, how come we're not doing better than 1%? Well, what does that represent in the number of students? Is it any idea?
Well, 13,000, 1%. Or not.
No, it's our
One
graduation.
of that cohort.
So we graduate.
So if you roughly look at Nampa High is basically 300, Skyview's basically 270, Columbia's basically 280. That's not exact numbers, that's just the traditional piece. Then you've got probably another 30 to 50 at Union, and then you're gonna have another probably 10 at Nova. Like, so there's all of those things when you look at that. So you're looking at 9 to 10 kids cohort of, as far as a percentage that growth. That's what you're looking at, so. The challenge with the graduation rate from that perspective that happens, right, and again, it's not excusing, it explains this data, is we're now dealing with the 2 years of kids with extreme mobility and or extreme learning gaps. So to get back on as the state calculates a 4-year cohort graduation rate is going to be difficult. To be clear, in our system, there are numerous 5th-year seniors that go to all of those schools and do complete a high school graduation and get their diploma, but they do not count as a graduate for this. So that's a piece of like there are kids who are graduating that because of those things, we're still doing what we can to help those students out, but they don't count on our graduation rate.
So our goal is to increase the go-on or the graduation rate by 9 or 10 students.
9 or 10 kids.
And those 5-year kids don't count in any, like, they
Correct.
drop off? Oh, I didn't realize
But-
that.
We actually
they
do
count it,
have
they
a
don't count.
5-year cohort model, especially for our alternative
Yep.
track type high
Yeah,
schools.
yeah.
So they
Correct.
did, as a part of the state accountability plan, start calculating a 5-year cohort rate, but that's more to help our alternate.
Well, and I would just be curious because I feel like we have a lot of 5-year seniors this year.
Yep.
And so that's really, okay. I
So,
had no clue.
so the 9 to 10 kids, 11 kids, whatever that number is that we're increasing on that cohort rate is that within the 4 years, and we probably have another 30 to 40 to 50 kids that are graduating, again, that didn't make the 4-year cohort the year before, but we're still graduating them and still getting them their diploma. So,
Well, and you have some that are just 2 credits shy that's
Correct.
trying to walk. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
And we even have some that were in that 2-year model, right? So we have to remember it would be a different cohort of kids, but we do the whole appeal process for that 5th year as well. And so we go through and we have kids who will finish in summer school the summer after, and they get to still count in that 5th. And so if they, summer after their senior year, if they complete, they still count
Then
in
they
the
count,
4-year
but
cohort.
after that, they don't.
But if they, after their 5th year, so if we have kids that are 1 or 2 credits short and they do summer school, that after their 5th year of high school, they get to count in that 5th year cohort too. So
Oh,
they
they
actually do it as
do
long
their
as they
cohort.
complete the requirements before the first day of the next school year.
Superintendent Russell, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are with regards to that 78.2. Do you think it's a target that we can meet? Do you think we can need to raise it, lower it?
Well, as we mentioned, I wanted to get back to above the state level, but considering what Waylon had mentioned, that we're going through 2 years of students who have had, the COVID, and 9 or 10 kids, I think it seems reasonable. It seems like we didn't meet the previous one, so talking through it, 1 to 1.5%, as the state does, seems like it's a reasonable goal and something that we can achieve.
So once we set this goal, you guys present it to the teachers too, and do you guys develop some type of a plan with senior teachers?
We'll present to like our college and career advisors. We'll let them know that that's kind of a goal we have. Our goal is 100% for every kid though, to get across the graduation rate. So we're not gonna say, hey, let's just try to get 78 and everybody hit 22.
You get to.
Every year, it's every single kid, get them across that stage no matter what. And all of our high schools really, I mean, Waylon can speak to that, just do everything they possibly can, bringing kids back, having kids work extra even before graduation, do any incentive they can to get a kid to walk through. So we typically don't advertise, hey, we're gonna go 78% because it's really 100. Every kid needs to do that. That's what we try to push.
And this has to be posted on publicly anyways, doesn't it? On the website, so. But there's so many variables that are involved with, a kid getting from freshman to graduation.
Correct.
But 1%, so really, those who are sophomores now, by the time they're seniors and graduate, we should be at that state 80%.
We should.
Give or take.
And that's where we're looking through, is that kind of moves through back to our practice where we were when we were exceeding state. We believe we can get back to where we can exceed the state average.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't, because we've done it.
Anita, I just have a question. High school equivalency, what does that counts
So
as a
it's a
loss?
drop-out.
And I just wanted to, okay, that's all good.
That's considered in the non-graduate.
A non-graduate. Even if they, go ahead.
That's something I would like to add on again, is the number of kids we're actually graduating. There are kids we graduate that cannot count in that 78% because of if they're an IEP student and there's a change in their educational program, that there are things that we don't get to count them. So they in fact graduate, we do everything we can to serve their needs, and they don't graduate because of the nuances and things that
But
change.
we can add that in here though, right?
We
can say, let's track the equivalency, let's track those that.
We could, the equivalency piece would be very difficult.
Yeah.
The kids who we still have in the system that graduate from our system, I think we could look at that as who does the state qualify as a graduate? Who do we qualify as graduates? I think that conversation is valuable. Once they get out of our system and go the GED route or go, like, that's much harder for us to quantify, so.
That's what I just wanted to double check on.
We talked when I presented the graduation rate that I was gonna share that, and I used the word squishy, because you were very kind to me when I was like, kind of squishy data, right? I remember this, because I was like, I can't think of another word for it, but,
I just love it.
we can go through and look at every non-graduate and write what we believe is their path, like whether they chose to go GED. Now, do we have evidence that they did a GED program? No, but they said, I'm gonna go do a GED program, and that's how we.
Well, but I feel like a
contemplate
lot do really.
Yeah,
That's the issue.
And we can, and I already have it in my plans to present that data to you, even though we talked about it would be squishy
Squishy
data,
data.
like, as long as you're
Nevertheless,
comfortable
it's-
being give or take.
It's important to know, I think it really is important.
I think it's
If we
great
can
data
get
to
it,
know.
if we can-
Yeah, I think it's great data to know. I don't know that it belongs in our continuous education, like our continuous plan, just because it's not a metric that's really calculated, but I love to know.
And I have it in our plan that we'll do that with all of
Well,
our four-year graduates, so we can do our best, as long, because you said you'd be comfortable with some squishy data, so.
Well, and the goal is to graduate them.
Mhm.
I mean, if they leave.
1,000,000%.
If they leave Nampa School District and they're not graduated and they end up getting a GED, yeah, that's fantastic, it'd be great information to know, but honestly, you're right, it doesn't belong in here because it's not part of that. Go on graduation rate, so anyways.
Anything else on that four-year? What do you guys think about that one? We had set it as 1.1 last year as our growth goal, and of course did not make that. We saw that decrease from 79.9 to 77.2. But that's how we calculated how we thought we might be able to start closing that gap.
I feel like you'd be setting yourselves up for failure to raise it. That's how I
Up to
feel.
78.2,
I really feel like we should leave it. We didn't reach the metric last
yeah,
year.
but we were
1%.
coming out of a different situation last year too.
Yeah, but you have to remember that a lot of those kids may have already determined, like, you're gonna have kids that have determined based on 2020 and where they're at in their education. I like the idea of the 3 years because you still have kids, I mean, Braxton's, or, you know, we have kids that are fifth-year seniors, but then you have kids who've already decided that they're either gonna leave or they're not getting back on track, so.
Because of this.
Because of this whole thing, I like that. I just feel like we're setting up ourselves for failure based on what the community's, I don't know, like the community temperature of, you know, if you wanna get your HSE and move on to college, you can. I think that there's a lot of that that's still going on just because some kids just aren't getting back on track.
I think with the economy the way it is, with the money that kids not having a diploma, things can earn, a number of them are in the workforce that became, I'm going to do that because it makes way more sense for my family and my needs right now to make $15 an hour than school. And that's, again, no excuses, but that is a reality of when that happened with being out of school, there were, I would suggest we're looking at this year's sophomores, you'll still see the skirt end of that. I'm hoping that it's this year's sophomores are the first that you had to head back into a normal school year last year. This year's group of freshmen are gonna be where you really start to go, okay, we're getting back to the normalcy of school is expected in being there, so.
Did the state of Idaho adjust their goals? Or has it always been right around 80%? Did they adjust for?
I can't speak that, Jeff, I don't know. I don't know if they, I don't believe so.
We just know
Yep.
for 21.
So quick question, maybe you guys answered it. So the state sets the goal, right? The main, what everybody has to be. Is there penalties or anything if we don't meet that? This is just,
Yeah,
This is one of the few things that's actually, it sets, the wording is so unique in the statute. But there, I call it more the carrot than the stick, right? If you don't meet your goal, there's not necessarily a stick coming for us, right, consequence. But they do give you this carrot of, if you do a good enough job in setting goals and doing your plan, then you can be a model district for everyone else. And so they try to sell it as this positive.
so at the end of the day, this is just basically for our own push, right?
yes.
Well,
Who
we still
cares
have to
what
have
this-
it. We still have to have
Yeah,
it. Yeah, we have to
yeah.
satisfy the
I
statute.
mean, the goals are great, but they can't be unrealistic and they can't
Right.
be
No, yeah.
non-achievable either.
You
But they
also
do
have
need
to
to.
answer to your community when if they are unachievable and then you're not even coming close, you have to be able to communicate the why and how we're getting there. And if if you're, I always pick on literacy because I've seen districts that have like 70% literacy and they're like, oh, we're gonna have 100% literacy this next year. Is that, like, that's,
Right,
that
it's
is
a good goal, it's ambitious.
Oh, and it's a great dream, but is that reasonable?
Yeah.
To have that much growth, like, we want that, but then how do they communicate to their patrons when they come in at 73%? Because what you wanna do is that 3-year goal, you're building that foundation for a systemic change, rather than just this group. But I always compare it to my kids, my daughter is like, I can only get straight A's, my son's like, C's get degrees, I'm a compliance kid, right? And so it could be that group of students that are coming in, they might be excellent test takers.
Right.
And then that next year, that next grade, they might not do so well. So you wanna look at that cohort to think about, let's make it reasonable, but let's really think about how it can help the student. So making it achievable, but also reasonable.
Right. Seems to me that something like this, when we're setting goals that are gonna benefit us, that we not only, I mean, as a district, it's not only the counselors or the advisors that are pushing this, but it seems to me that whenever you set a goal, you get everybody involved in it. The students need to realize what the goal is and how they can help each other achieve that. The parents need to realize what the goal is and see what they can do, because it's, and the district, to me, it seems like it's a three-way fight to increase its numbers, not just the counselors themselves or the advisors.
Well, it's certainly a collective effort to get
Sure.
to
It's
this.
gotta be a collective.
So, and maybe to your question, 77.2% in 21. The staff, your staff suggested 78.2%. Do you think that's a little bit high?
No, I think it's pretty different.
Oh, that's what I was thinking too. I thought you were talking, staying at 77%.
No, I like the
Oh, okay.
increase.
Yeah.
So they have to increase it more than that.
To me, as
Yeah,
a
I just
district,
think
we
when
need
we
to
go
always
higher,
continue to try to grow forward.
Yeah.
And when you put the number on the 9 or 10 kids, to me, that's doable.
I
Right.
do too.
The difficulty, I think, with what Mark was saying, is it does need to be collective effort with everyone. What's so hard about the graduation rate is the cohort. There's kids that aren't even in our system right now. We don't know where they're at. That will count against us in trying to find it. And so so really what we're trying to focus on, the students that are in our seats every day, our goal is you're gonna get across that stage, particularly starting with seniors. We're gonna do everything we can to get you across that, catch your credits up, check on your plans to make sure that you're doing that. Then we'll move into juniors. And so it is an effort, but it just, because of those kids who've entered that cohort that we don't know where they are 3.5 years ago,
I know.
it's such a hard thing to put all your resources for. So that's one of my frustrations with what the state has done with, it used to be just enter your senior year, leave your senior year,
There you go.
and that makes a lot more sense, because I have control over that, who's in our system. It's part of this goal is we don't have control of, and it makes it a difficult one to say, hey, everybody, let's focus on something that we don't have full control over.
And I do wanna just commend our leadership at our high schools, though they're doing the tough work of trying to do home visits and track kids down that just stop showing up, and they're meeting with parents to talk about how we're gonna help continue. So it is a really combined effort from everyone. The appeal process ends up falling to a few of us, but I do wanna say over those 4 years, they work so hard to try and track those kids
The
down.
summer school programs we have where they track every kid with every credit they earn, I mean, they ring bells when they celebrate kids when they make it.
Oh my gosh,
and
they
push
take it
it.
a step further.
That's awesome.
Condi made a call party. Condi Engage had a call party.
Yeah.
My 17-year-old, Condi, he's a teacher at Nampa, but he had to do summer school this year, and they called me, and he made music with his mouth, and it was Mr. Condi was killer at it, and it totally reinvigorated Engage. I feel like we do a killer job trying to get kids caught up that want to be back on track.
That's awesome.
So I'm good with the 78.2. I just, when we were talking, I was just a little confused.
Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you.
No, that's all right. It's not you. It was me that confused myself.
What do you think about the 78.2?
I have to be fair, it's gonna be a push goal, because I also have seen the preliminary numbers on our, because again, this is the group of kids that have completed. It'll be a push goal, but I think it could be possible, but it'll depend on how successful we are with our appeals to remove kids from the cohort.
That's gonna be one of the most significant challenges is the appeals piece with the circumstances of not being in school for a quarter and where so many kids, like, we had kids that move out of state, move out of country, and like, so they're in the ether and we have no other way to get a hold of them.
The upside down.
So, yeah, I truly, and that's no excuse, it's just the reality of that circumstance. And we're seeing the numbers trail what that is now, because some of those were sophomores, well, they're coming up with this year, right? So that's the challenge with that. It's to Dr. Russell's point, if I had, when you entered your senior year where you're in there, like that one's much more manageable, much more controllable. There's so many variables that 4-year rate, it's super hard to
You
navigate.
just do that for each, like
Mhm.
9th grade, 10th grade
Yep.
level, just add them up at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
say, here it is. See, that's how my math works.
There's some here.
Okay. I will, so when we come back together on Monday, the 26th for that board meeting, I will put that 78.2 and that 22.
Are we-
Well,
target.
we all have to agree first.
Oh,
Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not making a motion. Right?
No, I just wanna make sure.
My opinion was, I think 78.2 it'll be a challenge,
Mhm.
but goals are supposed to be challenging. But it's certainly realistic and I think achievable.
Tracy, what do you think?
What they're saying is, I don't wanna I think it's sad that it's a hard goal to meet, but I don't want it to not be met.
And I totally agree with you, but the variables here seem to be something that is very difficult to control. And we're always gonna be under, never be able to achieve 100%. And because everything has to be based on trackability, and tracking people sucks. So, yeah, I'm with you guys.
Okay, so ready to move on to go on rate goals. So that second item, this is a locally chosen metric, and we have the percent of students who go on to some form of post-secondary education within 1 year of high school graduation. Our performance in 2021 was 38%. Our target was 48%, so we thought 2% growth would be fantastic a year ago. And then we actually dropped 7% down to that 31%. And of course, we don't have that state comparison piece. They didn't do their big push they sometimes do about go on rates. So I don't know if it was a state drop too, or if maybe they just didn't share with us, but 33.
What are you looking at?
What page are you
Oh, I'm still on
Okay.
just the second item. We just did the 4-year, the
next
blue
one.
one.
yeah.
We are just on the very next line,
You're
going
right.
through that cohort. Sorry.
I had already turned my page,
Sure.
I know, and I had
Oh,
already
we
turned my
only
page,
did
sorry,
one.
I know, I had already turned my page, sorry, I had already turned my page because I needed
I did
another
not
note.
use my best teacher skills to make sure
No,
we were
you're
all on the
totally
same
fine,
page.
you're totally fine, totally my fault. No, it was totally my fault because I had turned my page to take it out, my fault.
That's okay. So just that second row there, percent of students who go on to some form of post-secondary, and then I just talked to where our NSD performance was, what our target was, and then our actual percent. I have to admit that I didn't even want to try to calculate us to get back to where we were, and I just plugged in as we talked about what we should possibly put in there. You'll notice that we stuck with the same 2% growth that we had last year, even though I have no explanation for why, but a year ago we thought 2% sounded good. I'm not gonna say the trend data is gonna match that, but
What's the state right now with go on rate? It's been dropping.
it's been dropping, but they didn't do their big press release they normally do that shares that this time of year. Normally they do a big press release about their go on rate, and it hasn't been published this year. Has anyone else?
It might have dropped by 7 or 8% as well.
Like I'm pausing just to be like, I
Well,
don't
the
catch
go-on
on,
rate
but.
to some form of post-secondary education, that could be not just college or university, it could be trade school, anything like that, right?
But this is, if you remember, this is from that National Student Clearinghouse, so this is 2 or 4 year degree program.
So if they don't report to that,
If they don't
may not
report
count
to
for
that.
us. This is what's so frustrating about all of this stuff.
Wow.
Right.
This doesn't count the kid who got an apprenticeship to be a plumber and is doing it, like, this doesn't count that
Making
kid.
more money than anybody.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
Working in an auto body shop. or something.
To some form within 2. Yeah.
We just kept 2. We used to have 3 goals to fall immediately after within the first year, within the 2 years. They removed the fall because they're like, kids need a gap semester. I think we shouldn't look so closely at that.
Any idea what the state, I know, this could sound like we asked the same question, not for this last year, but just even previous years, just kind of give us some idea of what the state's goal was, like 2019.
The proposed goal was 60% go on rate, and it wasn't even close. I mean, I think it was,
60%.
that's what the state had shot a goal like 4 or 5 years ago, and I think it was still in the 40s and
We're
dropping.
still in the 40s.
Yeah, the state never even made it close, which I think made state leaders realize we're
Yeah.
not gonna get this.
Yeah.
And they used to do these press releases year after year, and it's actually dropped since they set that goal.
So post-secondary education
Probably
is
look it
just
up real quick.
a
I'll
two-year
check
program.
for it.
Two.
4 year that was part of that national.
Maybe also public, otherwise you have to opt in.
Yeah, private university have to opt in.
Now, the state doesn't help itself when military, mission,
Right.
those things don't count against it, and those kids are, at least, absolutely, they're going on, and they're making something of their lives, and the state
Yeah.
doesn't count that with
Yeah.
it. So why the state does that, makes those decisions,
No, that's what I was thinking. Plus, there's such a not a push, but there's people realize that college.
I mean, that's
Isn't
really-
it
Costs more money than you'll
Right
make by
into it.
going.
Exactly, and
I
I
had
think
to
people are really
take, I
starting.
have to take it
It's
health
so
break.
true.
You bet.
Sorry,
A health
I just
break?
have to use the restroom.
Does that
I don't
mean
know what
can-
you're.
Does that mean I can eat this all enjoy? Is that what you're
Sorry, it
saying?
really was my fault. If I-
So during graduation, we asked the students who were going to the military service to stand up, and we
Yeah.
gave them big applause. All those kids, every time I
Yeah.
see that, I'm so proud of them, but I realize the state doesn't count their work, and it makes no sense to me. And that,
But this is something that we choose to track, right?
That we choose, because we do get the metric from the National Student Clearinghouse to look at. We do try to capture some of the kids who go into the military with one of our items farther down, so I don't want you to think we just, because we do passionately care about that.
Well, and there's a lot of folks in our community that do care about the college and the university and, moving on, and there's a lot that don't think that that's, yeah, I get what you're saying, it's just. Yeah, you set a goal for 33%,
So.
which sounds
Just like a
ridiculously
median.
low for a
So
go-on rate,
I
but
don't know the
then
2-year rate, but this.
people don't stop to analyze what
37 for
that includes, what that means.
the state's at 37% now.
37. So we set it, so the state's at 37%, the thing is, they're gonna top that all over the country. Sorry.
And
My opinion is starting to bleed.
interesting to note, in 2017, 2 years before the pandemic, was at 50, then 48, then 46, then 39, then 37. So the trend line before the pandemic was even trending down.
The state's starting to realize that it's,
Yeah.
just going to college doesn't guarantee success.
Correct.
Yeah, in society. in general.
Amen, yeah.
Yep.
But that's what sucks, is that generally, society doesn't tend to analyze what that 33% goal is. That's where my frustration sets in, I guess.
So do we get penalized, or, I mean, all these numbers, what does the state think? You need to meet certain numbers, or you get penalized, lose money, gain money? Nothing.
Nothing.
They just
Nothing.
require it, just
They
to
just
keep it
require
on.
it.
Well, they just print it in an article in Idaho Statesman.
Idaho
Look at all these.
Crazy. Idaho News.
Tracy, you get extra federal money when you're in the lowest performing schools, which we're hoping we're never in that,
Oh, my goodness.
right? And so, we don't ever wanna be in that lowest 3%, right? And it might even be 5, I cannot remember off the top of my head, but that's when, they do, come in and give you additional money to put towards those programs, but you really wanna look at how to implement and utilize your district funds to improve your students.
Which improves the community and the state and the world, right?
So are we still in the conversation of go on? So the only reason I think, and I'm just gonna be really bold in saying this, that we should keep that fairly low is because I think that there's also, the state has to catch up, like, I've got a gal that's 20 years old who's making $15,000 a month as an influencer. She's not my child. But I think that there's also things that we're not considering that kids are doing after high school that we haven't even thought of. So I mean, that's a real job. Influencer, Instagram model, I mean, these are real jobs where they pay, I mean, $15,000 a month at 20. I mean, I just to post a picture of yourself in some DoorDash jeans, I have the wrong job. But that being,
It didn't work.
yeah, just like I tried it. He's like, I didn't get any money. So I just don't know if I definitely think that I also think that there's a societal shift where not everybody believes now that that's the only way to go is going right to college. And if we're not,
Conversation when you were.
oh, good, great, then I'm on the
Some
same
people think
page.
it's really important and that's a huge indicator and others who don't. And so how do we, try and capture?
So are you all right with the 33%? Trustees, I'm keeping that as a district goal.
Isn't it 43?
No.
Oh, sorry, 33%
43
of
would
going
be for the 2 years out within.
with that in high school.
Just some more other goals.
You what?
Until you analyze them as to why, and then it makes sense.
I am, because I think there's a lot of things outside of college these days, and I think it's changing, and
I do too.
I actually encourage, although, well, one of my students or kids went to Marines and 2 are in college, but it's changing.
So what do you think, Dr. Russell? 33%, is that what your recommendation is?
It is, just again, because I don't like to have goals that are flat. That never feels good. You should always be trying to improve, and I think that's an important thing. Knowing that the state's at 37, and clearly the data showing it's going down every year, and I think society is waking up to the fact that there's opportunities outside, and actually now the world is changing a little bit where you get in the workforce, and the workforce actually helps pay for your post-secondary education.
Yep.
People are realizing that,
Yep.
and then with
Amazon,
inflation,
Amazon.
the fact that families need income and folks can get a job now that pays $20 an hour and
Yep.
whatnot. I think that plays into all of this. So to me, that's why it's a small gain. It's still showing that there's still some desire to improve, but understand that there are many variables that kind of play into the low number. It feels rough saying 33% is what we're shooting for, but it's better than 31%. So.
I actually feel like it shows that you have a good grasp of the community that you're leading.
And I think there's a big, issue with student debt, and so they have siblings or they do
Absolutely.
these huge debt,
Absolutely.
they're sinking, they're like, don't do it, and so they're finding other avenues.
Sure.
Or parents.
Because they're seeing them,
Yeah, and if we're doing our good job of personal finance, and you're letting folks know that, that
Exactly.
there's getting yourself $60,000 in debt and coming out with $25,000 in a job,
Exactly.
that's not good finances.
And-
So
That word
It's
is
not
getting
financial.
out.
Yeah.
So I'm with the 33%, I mean, it makes sense to me, and the 43%, because it sounds like it was the same type of argument here.
And I don't know why we had seen our kids doing better in that 2-year model, right? Well, we picked an 8% goal last year and I do not know why. I wish I could remember.
8%, you said?
We did 42 to 50%.
Oh, to increase,
And
okay.
so I did not
Yeah.
go that robustly this year I stuck with that.
Well, within 2 years of high school graduation, that could be some of those kids that have gone on a mission and are coming back and getting into high school or getting into college or deciding, you know what, if I want to be a doctor, I'm gonna have to get after it.
Right.
So am I looking at this right, you had it in 2020, 50%, but the actual was 41.
Correct.
Yeah, so we don't want that. So that is it went up 42 to 50. Okay.
That was our goal, was we wanted to
Yeah, I
go with
see
8%.
that.
I don't know that I could recommend that
Yeah.
again this year.
Okay. Yeah,
Now, that 50%.
well, the state's not even at,
That was, you didn't know what was gonna happen in the beginning of 2020.
Actually, I think now I do remember why we set that so high. We hoped those kids who opted not to go to college because of the pandemic and it
Had to
didn't
stay
seem
Would be
to
coming
affect
back,
tumultuous
yeah.
time, we thought they might come back after a gap year and that is, I do remember, no,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, but it took almost 2 years for the college experience to even, I would say this is the first normal year of a college experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, for a lot of colleges, not all. I don't want to speak broadly, but.
Well, the 43%, I don't have a problem with that either.
Yeah, I'm good with it too.
We could spend all night trying to analyze
Yes,
these.
we
I
do.
know.
Oh, I remember.
I'm
That's
just
the
glad
fun
that you
part.
guys are explaining this, I mean, in a way so we can understand it. It sounds like you guys have done your homework too, so.
We've done this before,
We've dug into this many a time, okay? Okay, so looking at,
Percentage of students with learning disabilities?
yes,
Okay.
well, actually, we're gonna
No,
go to the number of high school
associates.
students who graduated with an associate's degree or a CTE certificate. You can see that we saw that dip in our 2021, our performance was 277 tech certs. You'll see that we actually set our performance target to have 2 less tech certs. I just want to say we are really concerned that our freshman class within these cohorts did not get the opportunity in their business classes. That normally their freshman business class, they get a whole bunch of Microsoft certificates, or they can choose to get Microsoft certificates. And we, when we were not in person, that impacted our kids' ability to be able to get those certificates. So that was, we didn't want to go too much lower than where we were. But on a really exciting note, on the celebration, we did 302 tech certs, our seniors who graduated with a tech cert. So we actually beat our goal and exceeded it. So that was very exciting. And I maybe got a little excited and put the 306 tech certificates because I got so excited as we were talking, and then was brought back to reality again to not forget that poor freshman class. And they appreciated my enthusiasm, but they thought maybe a 275 or any number in between that. They're just concerned because so many of our kids graduate high school with Microsoft tech certificates that they didn't get the opportunity because of the pandemic. And since it's our seniors, they didn't want them to be unfairly counted in there. But I think you have some options.
How long does it take to get a Microsoft certificate?
Depends on
It
the
depends.
certificate.
Yep. And there are individual certs, so they could be certified in Word, certified in Excel, or certified in Office Suite. So there are different levels and
That
things there.
seems like all of them should have gotten the certificates during COVID when they were all at home.
If there were certificates in TikTok, I think we might have gotten a lot of those.
Social media certificate.
No, but you can make 15
Um,
Oh, I guess.
Anita, let me ask just a question really quick. I know that we had discussed a little bit in here that we would change and count multiple certificates per student. So if we made that change, then of course we would change this goal accordingly. So maybe should we discuss that first, if that's something that we were gonna consider?
Cause this is 302 students right here, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I wasn't for that. I think it totally depends on what you guys are wanting to see for that. I'm agreeable either way, but I do know that multiple kids get multiple certificates.
Could we track both of them? Why not track both? I think it would be pretty easy if you track
for sure.
302 unique students that got certificates, and then you track, but this is how many
Unique and
certificates they
total.
earned. And maybe track the students who earn multiple certificates. I think that's a very telling, not only to the students who are going after it, but to the staff who can provide the instruction and to get it all done.
I would make a suggestion to leave the goal the same and just list your individual students, and then behind it, earning this number of certificates,
Just kind
right?
of split it up.
So 305 students earning
X amount of certificates.
673 certs or whatever, right? But that would be my suggestion.
I think
Instead of
that
an
would-
hour, that
Yeah,
makes
that
sense.
keeps it.
And that way, again, kids earning at least one, we're identifying that, and in that, yeah, I
So
think
we're
that's
saying
what
unique students plus total certificates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we would just document that behind the, and here's the number of certificates, so you can do
Number of
that.
students and number of certificates.
That makes sense.
And, okay, and so we're wanting to leave the goal at 305?
Or,
Cause
Yep, 305, but I think Wayland wants the certificates of like 600 and something.
673 was the number I pulled out of somewhere,
You
so.
said that they felt like that was a little advantageous, that 305.
I won't lie, I mean, we talked about it and really felt good about that 305, and it was the college and career advising folks that were like, ooh, we're still a little nervous, but they met it.
Okay.
Yeah, they met
So
it.
I love it.
Whatever.
But what would look, but even if they didn't meet the 305, but they had the certificates, the number of certificates is really gonna
Right.
tell a story too. in a
Yeah,
matter
Yeah,
of
so you
time.
come in at 298 and
I
you
think that
have
kind of-
800 certificates, right there, that's
I
gonna
think
speak
that
to
would
us.
look good.
And that's gonna be a huge shout out to
Even if
not
you
only
had
the
less
students, but
students
staff.
and didn't meet the
And the
305,
program.
but you counted all the certificates.
Okay, I think we'll agree on that.
Yeah, I like it.
Keep it at 305 and the 4 associates degree, is that what you're
Yeah,
gonna say?
we talked a little bit as I was giving that information about how that may not be the metric we want to keep, but we can if you'd like. Just knowing that they don't receive enough money now in advanced opportunities to do that. I don't know.
Was it the same way last year?
that last year was the first year they didn't receive enough money in advanced opportunities to pay, and we've seen that stay at that 4 realm, right? Because
I'm sorry, do you know the gap between what they receive and kind of what it costs, or does it vary by institution?
by what we're doing for dual credit costs, so through advanced opportunities, they're 400, they'd have to have $400 extra out of pocket.
It's 400 out of pocket to get associates.
And that was this last year, so I'm assuming it would be.
So
In
some
those-
families not an issue, but for some families,
it
that's a big issue.
But it doesn't, that's not tracked in here yet, right, though?
Well,
for
yeah, they
associate's
are
degree,
saying that our numbers stayed the same regardless.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so 4 all the way through.
And the kids that were so far into it with the rule change, I don't know the names of those 4. I can think of one. If you're that close, there's gonna be we gotta get this done,
Yeah,
right? So that
So no
piece
matter
there,
what
so.
the money was, it was
Selling
going
them a
to
kid or
anyway.
something.
But I don't know how long that will last, right? Now knowing that, wait, it's gonna gap me out that I can't do that with the money the state's allocated, so.
Is that $400 extra, the whole program, the degree program, the whole per student for the whole?
To finish an associate's degree,
Yeah,
and the
per
gap
student.
that they received.
That's still not a bad deal, though.
No.
I know it's.
No, being
extra
able
money,
to
but
lose
$400
the
for an
associates, $400, yeah, the only got being not 400, I don't know, I think that we stayed at 4,
Just keep it at 4
I would
and see what
agree.
happens this year. That could be very.
That's probably good to see what happens.
And then we can decide if we wanna keep that
Yeah,
metric
sure.
from the future
Yeah.
after we see how this year goes.
Yeah, leaving high school with the associate's degree.
So I think I'm hearing that we're okay with this one, keeping it at 305 for associate's degrees. Then the next chunk is kind of combined together. It's that 8th grade, which is where they create and review their learning plan, and then those 9th through 12th grade. And as we see where we performed at in 2021, we set a performance target of 95 across the board. We exceeded that in 8th grade and in our senior class, but we didn't quite make that with our 9th through 11th grade. And so as we talk through, 95% is a pretty good stretch goal, but really with the new system in place and after piloting this year, they really think they could at least hit that 95%. And so I maintained that rather than trying to go from 97 or 100% of our seniors, you can't exceed that. So we got 95% for that next group as we looked through that with the.
So this is driven by who, the teachers? Who does the exams?
So it's, our college, our counselors actually move in and help do that and take the kids through that. So creating their learning plan, talking through and trying to help set them in that forward thinking in 8th grade before they transition to high school, what they might be interested in for a career path. That helps them select into CTE programs and those type of things as they do that.
And there's collaboration between our middle schools and our high schools. Our high school counselors actually go down and present to the middle school kids with help from the counseling staff at the junior high. So there's collaboration and out there, so.
When's the due date? When do they need to have that completed by?
I don't know that. Leland, do you know?
I don't know of a calendar date. We typically look at the end of the school year because we're registering 8th graders for 9th grade. Like that process happens in the spring of their 8th grade year. So I think it truly is by the end of that school year. So I don't know of an actual calendar date. I've never seen that.
So what does this represent, that number of students whose learning plans are reviewed annually by the grade level? So this means this is how many students that they went to the teacher.
The counselor went to them and said, Trustee Pearson, let's look at your plan of what you're gonna do with your life. Let's walk through
So it's
this.
driven by the counselors?
Yep.
Seems like everybody would be on there 100%, so why isn't that 100%?
So there,
Maybe I don't understand.
yep, no, there are kids that aren't showing up like right up that same
So they weren't
scenario.
able to
Exactly.
meet
Yep.
Because they weren't there.
Correct.
Or
So,
for
yep.
some reason.
We still develop a plan for them. For example, a freshman coming in is gonna have 5 required classes and 3 electives. What we try to do is elicit student voice and choice of what do you want your electives to be, all of those things. And we do that process. Once that's in place, that becomes part of the plan of here's what you're taking, here's the elective you're taking to look at what you might do in your sophomore year and your senior year, right? So those are the conversations that happen. But for this, it's that we actually reviewed with the student, like, hey, we sat down and went through that process is my understanding of where those numbers come from.
So
So,
there's usually about 5% of
Yeah.
the student body that doesn't even meet that.
Yep.
Okay.
grade level?
I
Yeah,
was
you're never
thinking,
gonna get the
I was
100%.
thinking 95.1.
I can make it
No.
so.
Sorry.
Gotta increase it a little bit.
That might get us though, because they never give me the tenth of the percent, so I'd be like, yeah, add it to the tenth for me this time. Okay. So then let's look at this next line. So the percent of 12th grade students applying to at least 1, 2, or 4-year institution or going into the military, because I mentioned up above that this was still a really important component to us. So we have kids who have committed to going into the military after graduation. We have kids who are applying to those 2 or 4 years, and they've done a big focus on college application day, and Raylan's over here shaking his head because we really do try to get every one of our seniors to apply to a 2 or 4 year college or university. And so I will say that before I complete this line, this is the first year I will probably say this, and maybe a funny year. I might recommend that we remove the will increase from prior year, and that's only because of this very exciting number over here we're going to talk about. So our performance back in 2021 was 74%. We set our goal for 75% because we're like 3/4 of our seniors. We could do that. Let's move it 1%. And then we blew it out of the water last year. 9 out of 10 of our high school seniors last year completed a 2 or 4 or went into the military, and they had that information, which was a very exciting piece. I don't know about you, but that number is exciting to me, even if our go-on rate was not exciting.
That's what I was on.
We had a large number of our kids go into the military and or at least apply to that 2 or 4 year. That doesn't mean they chose to go for any number of other reasons, but that was a really exciting number. And I don't know, knowing that we also have that percent of kids that aren't going to be really excited about going on to a 2 or 4 year university, right? They've already made some other choices to go into things that won't fulfill that requirement, or they're already making good enough money that they're they're putting us to shame with the money they're making in high school. And so we, as the college and career advisors were talking, they didn't know that they felt comfortable saying that they wanted to push even more kids to apply when they're not, that isn't their path, right? So they're not going into the military, but maybe they're doing that plumbing apprenticeship or other things that wouldn't be involved a 2 or 4 year degree. And so if we remove the will increase from prior year, my 90% again next year will make sense to you because they were so proud of themselves and it is such an exciting number. I just don't know that we would get above that.
So a clarification on the applying to at least one institution, how far into the application process do they go before that's counted? Do they take the SATs? Do they actually application fee paid to the college?
Super interesting thing is that many of our 2 and 4 year institutions don't require the SAT, so that they don't
Okay,
have,
so they
don't have that.
they just make the application.
Correct. And
If there's a $35 application fee, whatever it is, whatever.
and those fees are waived many times within Idaho. So like if it's an Idaho institution applying to go to CWI, that's taken care of as a high school senior like that. That's a process.
It's not
Correct.
to the point of registering for classes
No.
or anything.
No, it is applying for it. And
They don't even get an acceptance or anything.
yes, they do get an acceptance. Hey, you were accepted and
So
then
that's
yeah.
the point then probably.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And because our hope is, one of the difficulties we found is that kids even completing the application process and when they're
There's a challenge.
is a challenge. And so helping them through that, so we do a huge focus on how we help kids go through the application process and complete it and know how to request their transcripts and do all of those things that have to be done, right? I think that's been something they've really focused on because they figured if we jump the hurdle of at least applying, maybe we'll actually get you there.
That is really good too. I wish more people could understand that too. Anyways, that's just a thought. I wish that in all of these that you could put your explanations into each one of these as a footnote.
We are live streaming.
Or people could just watch the meeting if they were
Yeah,
super
we know that's- I
interested.
mean, once it goes on the web. Anyways. So 90%,
They wanted to keep that as, because then it's a push goal.
I
They
think
worked
that's-
really
And
hard
then you wanted
get
us
that.
to remove the wording will increase.
If that would be okay,
Yeah.
just because it's the first time we've ever been like, I don't know that we are committed to increasing that number, but if you would like us to, we could.
And if you do, that's great.
Exactly.
yeah, 90% and removing will increase from prior year.
And then last but not least, on the college and career ready, increase the number of dual credit courses students enroll in is tracked through the Advanced Opportunities portal. And this is purely that enrolling in those courses that are a dual credit course and how it's tracked. And that's where they pay, the state of Idaho helps pay for those college credits for kids. I do think it's important to note, part of why we looked at not going too much past that 2,750 as our goal again this year, because we didn't need it. We did increase from 2,529, but just to that 2,671. And as we talk about it, it's important to note that in order for kids to get to continue to take courses to advanced opportunities, if they fail one of their dual credit courses, they actually have to pay for the next credit out of pocket to access the rest of their money. Does that make sense? And so we did have some kids during the pandemic not do as well in those courses. And so we were so pleasantly surprised. We made it to 2,671, but we still have some kids that are looking at that. Oh, I have to pay to get my next, to unlock the rest of my advanced opportunities money. And so we didn't, as we talked about the goal, didn't think that going above 2,750, even though that was our goal last year, was maybe it's still a little high, but.
And there's no appeal to that, right? There's no. I mean, I could see some students who have family members that were very ill. There's a lot of things that happened that I was able to, it's a challenging course I'm already in during the pandemic. There is no appeal to that.
Not that I'm aware of.
I have never seen an appeal process on that, Dr.
Which is
Russell.
disappointing.
Correct.
Because it's
what is the average cost?
$75 or so a credit. That's the typical. I mean, so each dual credit course, it depends on the institution that they're doing the dual credit through, but typically it's a $60 to $75 seems to be the average. And if you pay for an IDLA course, it's a $75 charge most times. So
We just pass the cost on to our kid who doesn't pass the class, and they have to pay for the $75.
Yeah.
When did this start again?
Advanced opportunities?
Yeah, the dual credit.
8-9 years ago.
Oh, okay, so I was just wondering, it's not a lack of people not knowing about it. I mean, I'm sure that's always there.
no.
Or understanding what that is.
Yeah. I think again, another pandemic ramification of, things were difficult. If I failed this class, which is already challenging above my high school courses, and now I'm kind of stuck. I gotta pay $75, and I could just see some kids being like, it's not worth it. So
Yeah,
I'm not
like I
gonna
said,
register, right? Which is disappointing.
Yeah, mine did too, and I told her, I said, you're paying $75 if you don't pass the class.
We also, if we could pay for it, but if they didn't pass it, they would have to refund.
So the way that it reads, I just pulled up the State Department, dual credits are reimbursed at up to $75 per credit. So if someone finds an institution that they're getting for $60 whatever, they can actually get more credits over time, but up to $75 per credit is the max that they will pay per credit, so.
Well, the 2750 seems within reach.
Right.
In my opinion, I'm not speaking. for-
I'm sorry, what did you say?
The 2750 for the dual credit courses, that seems within reach.
Me too.
I don't have an issue with that.
Sound okay?
Just before we flip the page, just back to the 305 tech certs, you mentioned 305 tech certs and 4 coach history. I just want to make sure that we have the notation that we're going to.
Add in the total.
Fantastic. Okay, so the next section of the CIP, as they like to call it, is all students will be prepared to transition from middle school and or junior high to high school. And so it's really those transition years. On an interesting note, those are the wordings of it, I just would like you to note that the grade levels they focus in on would be 6th grade, even though our kids transition to middle school in 6th grade, but they have a number of schools across the state who have junior highs instead of middle schools, and so that is the grade level that we are required to report out on in 8th grade. You will also notice there's a big red note in here that this is the big piece of accountability data that we still do not have from the state of Idaho and won't receive until middle of next month is when they are guessing they will get this to us. And in case you're looking at me going, didn't we already take the ISAT test? Didn't we do it last spring? Oh, trust me, I know we did. The accountability data is calculated on a really unique formula, and the fact that accountability data has to do with continuous enrollment. So while we have participation rates Accountability data means that within the first 50 calendar days of school, if you were enrolled on our campus, or one of our campuses, and you enrolled through the ISAT testing window, magic date in April or May, depending on the year, that you are considered in our accountability. Now, if you come in to the Nampa School District in November, well after that 50-day mark, you don't count in our accountability data. So we still have to test you, and we're still going to get your test scores, but you don't count in accountability. It even means if you enroll in the Nampa School District and you go to Endeavor Elementary School, for example, and you're there the first 3 months, and then you move over to Iowa Elementary for 3 months, and then you move over to another elementary school, you will not count in any of those 3 schools' accountability data. But if you stayed in the Nampa School District for all of that, you get to count in the district accountability data. It's super messy, and there's an appeal process to that we do in the summer. They opened that window late, and so that's part of why I think that they're late in reporting this accountability data back to all of us. Now, I say that to you because this is old data that we won't actually dig into unless you really like to look at some old data when it comes to ELA and math. But as we were talking about the fact that this would cause us to have to put off having a template, we really talked about the idea, the administration talked about looking at the data that we have from 2021, comparing us to the state of Idaho performance and closing that gap in a 3-year model. And it isn't just our proficiency in those, we also have to look at adequate growth. Now, if you think that accountability data is unique to calculate, adequate growth has to do on all of our kids closing the gap if they're not proficient over a 3-year model, and we calculate it out. Problem being, 2020, we didn't have ISAT data, right? And so 2021 is on a 2-year growth model because we have a missing year of data. I will not bore you to tears. I cannot make this exciting. I've done tons of presentations on it and people get it, but they just look at me and they're like, you just do this formula for every kid? Yes, I do. So
I just think that you are the nicest human being. Like, you just say that like,
it's okay.
it's okay.
Excel is your friend. It will help you calculate everything you need to do. It'll be okay. So I say that to you, not digging into page 4 and page 5 because it's really just our old data, right? We don't have our current 2022 data, but I would direct you to look at page 6 with me if you would like.
You could, I'm sorry, I did have a question on here, and you started down that path. What does adequate growth mean? I get the missing year in 2020, but what defines adequate growth?
So,
A 2 percentage point increase or 1%?
So, well, I could take every kid individually. So let's take a 3rd grader, and whatever their math score is, I have to say that's your 3rd grade score. So 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. To be proficient in 6th grade, you would need this cut score. How many scale points difference is that from your 3rd grade? And then I have to divide that by 3, and then I have to add it back to that original 3rd grade score, and that's what you have to get your 4th grade year in order to be considered having made adequate growth. Now that's our typical 3-year model.
Right.
Just note that 2021 was a 2-year model, so you only have the 2-year data.
Okay. Concept makes absolute sense to me. I glossed over the math.
It's okay. That's why I didn't even go into the numbers. I
No,
even
appreciate
sometimes
it,
will bring
though.
my cut scores and help you out, but I didn't think you guys wanted to get that far into the weeds with me today. So does that kind of help you see how this is a little different? And so then if you want to flip to page 6 with me, you will notice that we do not have our actual NSD column. I won't even have you highlight it this time because, well, we don't have any actual NSD 2022 data yet. We have all of our preliminary numbers, and we thought about putting those in here, but then that makes us have to live in draft form for the CIP that we post online. And as we talked about how we could maybe help us have a finalized CIP to approve if you would like, is we really went back and looked at our 2021 data and looked at closing that achievement gap to the state proficiency. So we did that whole, if 3 years to close the achievement gap to the state, what would we need to score in 2022 and then into 2023 is what we were looked at. We could set those as our goals using that same formula we did for grad rate. So 3 years to close the achievement gap, and knowing that 2022 is going to be that unique year in there. We don't have to do that, and we're just, as the administration was trying to think of ways to help us still have a CIP to approve. We could also not do that and wait to get the 2022 data and do that same type of formula to the state and wait for that. And we could post a draft CIP instead of our finalized CIP document. We just were trying to think of a way that we could help.
And even if it's finalized and we have different numbers, they gotta come back within a month anyways to the board if something
We could,
changes.
just to add a little bit to that, if you guys would kind of look at, on page 4, if you look at the gray lines there, that was our 2019 data. And if you look at those lines, you'll see we're really close to state average at 3rd grade. We meet it in 5th grade. We meet it in 7th grade. We meet it in 10th grade. Math, little similar, a little lower, but still had great growth in those. Things that we did there was identifying what is it the kids need to learn. We developed tiered levels of instruction, provided intervention for kids to be able to meet that. And so we felt like we had the things in place to get us there. So we feel like, unlike the graduation, which is so hard to track kids all over the place, this is something that we actually have full control over. So knowing that we had that success prior to the pandemic, there's no reason why we can't get back there again. It will take time though, because we got kids with gaps from the COVID. So to space that out over 3 years, we're gonna have to still work hard, but we think in 3 years we can get back up to that state average where we were and try to shoot that. So that's why we chose the 3-year goal.
So is that why the numbers look almost like the goal doesn't seem that, if I'm looking at the 2022 performance target and the 2023 performance target, there's a lot that are lower or look low. Is that on, for instance, 23% to 24.9, from 38 to 28, so there's been some drops like 63 to 54. Are you saying your drop, the goals aren't gonna be as high because you think there's gonna be some learning gaps there because of COVID?
And if you look at the 2021 performance, it really is us trying to get to that from 2021, getting that year's worth of growth, which is gonna actually be a 2-year model, right? Because it would be last year's scores, and while that doesn't seem as dramatically high as we'd like it to be, I think it's realistic when we look at how much we dropped.
What caused us to go so high for our targeted projected 2022, or do we know because
So the board helped select those, and we were really hopeful that we would just see phenomenal growth in that year. And I would love to say that my gut says we did those based off our preliminary data, but I would have a hard time saying.
It was hoped that the 3 months off wouldn't have impacted us as much as it did, but it clearly did. And then in that year was also a great deal of illness with so many staff
Right.
in and out, and so it was still a convoluted year. So probably the goals were high. I mean, honestly, they were set high.
So
Now we have a
based on
better
everything
reality.
else, you just feel like these are probably very good or fairly accurate projections?
I think they're realistic goals. And these are goals that we do communicate to the schools and administrators. And hey, our growth, and we expect X amount of growth as a district here. And we talked about setting targets with grade levels and departments and that kind of thing.
And did you guys have anything that gave you, and again, this is the only reason I'm asking is because some of these seem higher, so like, is there something that gave you guys an indicator that percentage of students who score proficient on grade 6 ELA ISAT, because that one's up, it's at a 40.2%, which is higher than what our projected goal was last year, or are they all done based on the same calculation and some were so increased?
They've done the same calculation.
Okay, and some were so increased, so it's that
They're
first
so
one.
far
That's where you
behind
got
where
that
the state
State
would be
was.
the closest.
Okay.
It really depends on the drop.
Okay, got
So
it,
you based it on that.
Yeah.
got
and
it,
Basically the same thing we described of how can we close that gap over 3 years?
Got
So
it.
if it's 8 points divided by 3, or is it 14 points divided by 3?
got it.
So we're gonna have to make some more growth at certain grade levels to stay on track with that.
So the
Those are
exact
things we'll
same
have to communicate.
formulation was used across the board, it's just where we thought those projected targets would be.
I mean, I hate to see a 30 from 22, a goal to 24, and a 38 to 20, I mean, but. It's just.
Well, but what I'm wondering is too, is that if we approve this and it's done and we get those, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to determine is that I feel like if everything else is coming this way, that it just makes sense to assume that this is what these are gonna come into.
And if we miss the mark, right, because again, it's all that accountability data and our continuously enrolled kids, we can amend what we.
Oh, we
set
can.
up for. Yep.
So we can amend, so if we just missed the market, say we just shot it out of the park and percentage of growth in 6th grade is 80%.
But even if we keep it at 24.4, what is it really gonna, I mean, we're gonna say students stay down at 20, I mean, so what is it? It's just keeping us, I mean, it's not really putting any limitations on anything. It's just kind of a.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's just gonna look good if we go above that, it won't look good if we go below that. It's all looks.
Well, and more so that you would be able to explain why you did that, right? If you had a
Yeah,
community
right.
member, it's important to me that you be able to
Be
say
able to
why.
explain it. Well, and like I said, if we blow it out of the park, it's just great
it's gonna
news.
look good.
Yeah, it's just great news. Any other questions?
So are you all you feeling pretty comfortable that we could fill those in? Cause then our
I-
plan would actually be.
I do, personally. Jeff, Tracy?
Yeah.
Michael?
I'm always, I hate to compare districts, but are some of the other districts in the region, Valley View, whatever, are they kind of in the same, or do you know, we don't know what the SIP plan is, but they're kind of facing the same issues that we are with overshooting some targets and.
So some of the school districts, it depends on the school district,
Yeah,
but some of the school district didn't drop as much during the pandemic.
didn't or
Didn't.
Well,
You
not
know,
all
so-
schools were closed
so
for as
schools
long as that.
drop.
I understand.
Every school district I know dropped. But where we have dropped like 9 points, a Valley View may have dropped 5. Whereas we dropped 12, a Valley View may have, or a CUNA might have dropped 8.
So relatively speaking,
We dropped more,
everyone's in the.
but everyone is in a
everyone's
catch-up
the same
mode. Everybody's in a catch-up mode.
Well, and after the state data comes out, you can actually request, comparable data to your most, similar districts that they usually are down to 5, cause they've got that tool, and then you can look to see where they're landing, they'll look at the demographics, but you really need to wait till the updated data comes out to really start to look, cause they usually do a 3-year projection on those.
Okay.
And demographics play a huge component into that.
I wish there was a way to tie down, bonuses, raises, or whatever to this numbers.
Did you update them on the evaluation process?
So like
No, that's our final
I
piece
feel
of
like
it.
that will tie with Marcus'
So,
question.
so before we move, on, I'm good with these target numbers here for 2023. That was just a more of a curiosity question.
And if you'd like, I can give you, once they release it, you can actually look at every district in the entire state, you can compare.
Yep, I have it on the to-do. I'm gonna request it from you via email.
Yep, and I'll send you the link right to
And I have
the
it
state
too.
website.
Might as well just.
You can put it
That's
on.
okay.
Send it to Tracy, and
I
she'll
have
just
to
send it
create.
out.
So going back, maybe that's a different conversation, but,
Can I just make one comment?
but tying something like this to their performance evaluations to, I mean, I don't know, is that possible?
It's already part of the state
Already part of
metric.
The state,
yeah.
but I'm talking for the employee itself.
No, it's for sort of, it's part of it's part of the teacher evaluation from the state already. Like that's part of the conversation. Pretty like, IRI for our K3, correct?
K3s.
I'm gonna
Um,
close this if you don't mind.
Yep. The challenge becomes, Trustee Bay, is exactly some of those variables we're talking about. If I'm lucky enough to have 30 kids that show up all the time, my data may look one way, and if I'm unlucky that I have 15 kids who do, and they don't get to my class, that's a really hard spot for me to be in as a teacher. How do I help them grow when they're not here, right? So there's a lot of nuance within that conversation. I think is a really interesting perspective to get into, but it is part of something that's already there when it comes to IRI and those things.
Same thing with administrators. Administrators all have to have some form of ISAC goal that ties to it based on their growth. So a couple years ago, for example, we asked all of our middle schools to focus on like 6th grade math. We'll have those conversations with administrators that they tie their goals to this. Teachers have similar. So it is one where we do come together and we do actually tie that to all things around evaluation as much as we can. Now, as Waylon pointed out, there's variables that play into it, but
Well,
sometimes
the second
too-
half of our meeting is gonna be on teacher performance metrics, so.
But sometimes too, if you get children who are illiterate when they enter the school, 20% growth is amazing if you get kids that are already that far behind the cusp as well.
So we'll talk about it a little bit later.
And this is just a comment, just because I'm learning all this, and this is a lot of information that's really amazing. And this is looking at the gap in learning because of the COVID, I would remind my fellow trustees, it's one reason that we really pay attention to closing schools and the COVID plan. It's a huge deal, problem when we close the schools, and that's why we were so adamant. I was so adamant, and all of us want to have a good plan so we can keep these schools. And the Zoom and all that just is not beneficial for these students, and this really is concrete evidence of that. And that's why those things are so important to me, and I know a lot of our community, that's really important. And then one other comment, just seeing the monies, the $400 extra per student for the associate's degrees and the extra $75 out of hand if a child or a student couldn't complete the dual. Those are things I think we need to remember when we have the extra money, fellow trustees. And these are just things I'm learning because of all the things we've been going through. Just a comment.
I like that.
I think for hardship for COVID, but I like the accountability that if you continuously fill the course, like after
I
COVID,
agree.
I think that there has to be some accountability for
I
that.
agree, because there is a responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes, good note to make.
And I did still the same one thing. All of these are required metrics, and you're gonna hear me come back to this same type of thing when we get to the early literacy, because 4th grade is also a required metric. So just don't let that escape your brain when I bring back up 4th grade ISAT here in a little bit. You'll know where it came from, where that data display is, okay? Because conveniently it's the next page if you guys are ready. This is my most exciting section on page 7. Yay, no. I'm so excited. This is my favorite page. At the very first board meeting, when almost all of you were there back in January, I actually did a presentation on the fall and early winter IRI to all of you. You may not remember, but think back to January. I did a little presentation and tried to share my enthusiasm for our IRI data because we had some exciting things to celebrate. And the really neat thing is I included this visual because it is such an exciting piece. So there are required metrics that we must talk about, which will be our IRI scores for K-3. They only focus in on the spring and how our kids perform in the spring, but I really wanted to take a minute to just show you some really exciting things about the growth our kids made in a 2-year period. So if we think about how this is set out, fall to spring, so fall 2021, think about that year and where we were at and kids not coming every day and those types of things. We still made some pretty decent growth with our kids. You'll see, really surprisingly, our kindergartners came in that year, even though we didn't start in person, at 41.8% were kinder ready to start that first month of school. We give this test in September, and you can see that that's one of the highest rates we have ever seen our kindergartners come in, so we did take that as a win. I just would like you then to compare it to last year, where just 27.6% of our kinders came in kinder ready. That is a really unique thing. I will tell you that parents helped administer the IRI in this one here, so just keep that first one, just keep that in mind, not saying anything, but just keep that in mind. So you'll see that our kinder students, we still in the percent proficient grew 15.4%, but we grew 30.5% from fall to spring last year, which is amazing to get all the way up to that 58.1. We see similar things with our first graders. I just want you to see that we almost doubled with 24% of our kids growing, starting at 36.4, hopping up to that 60.4. And you just see it continue with 2nd and 3rd grade. And just so you know, in early literacy, as you move up to 2nd and 3rd grade, it's harder to close achievement gaps the longer you're in our school system. And it's just worth exciting and celebration. And if you need something to say, look at what we're doing here in Nampa, this is your page. Like, I want to frame it and put it on my wall. We have really exciting things because we, as a district, K-3 grew 21.1% of our kids into proficiency. So this is a page just to celebrate the exciting things happening in our buildings in our K-3 early literacy plan. As we think about this, just remember that K1, 2, 3, all of those spring 2022 are going to come, you're going to see those again because we have to set goals off of spring for IRI. So I'll have that same type of table to help you tackle into that. Now, just in case you also wanted to see how we did compared to the state of Idaho on the next page there, This is one of my favorite graphs, because again, while we don't match the state in the percent of our kids proficient, I just want you all to notice these beautiful lines that run through here. And just notice that we had more growth from fall to spring in the Nampa School District than the state did. So while our kids didn't come in as high as the kids in the state, we outgrew them, and we're closing that achievement gap to get our kids caught up to that state. And that's another little celebration page if you need one. Whenever I'm not feeling great about things, I'm like, let's just look at some IRI data. We did some great things last year. So hopefully you can see my enthusiasm there. We did really great things with our K-3 kids. And so as we talk about goal setting, I hope we'll see how we kind of line this out. With the early literacy plan, remembering that last year is the first year that it was no longer a standalone plan. It used to be early literacy was a standalone plan, and last year it was incorporated into the entire CIP document. And with that, up until then, I wasn't necessarily the one who managed our learning plan. They had chosen with the board a goal of a percent of kindergarten students. So they wanted to look at our incoming kinders who scored below proficient on the fall IRI, who gained at least one performance category. So there's a 3 is our lowest level you can perform, 2 is the next highest, and then 1 is that proficient range. So they really wanted to focus on, are we moving our 3s up to a 2 or our 3s up to a 1, right? Are we moving our 2s up to that proficiency? So if you were not proficient in kindergarten, are we moving you? Even if we don't get you to proficient, but at least we moved you up, that means you made more than a year's worth of growth in a single year, right? Because you already have to make so much growth in a year. We need to close that gap so that you get caught up, right? So did we close that gap? On an interesting note on how they calculated it, I just wanted to remind you, they're ELA folks, they love early literacy. They just did a really unique calculation, which is that top line that you'll see there on the bottom of page 8. They took the number of kids who made that growth, so made the non-proficient kids who made 1 or 2 levels of growth from fall to spring, and they then took that number and divided it by the total number of kindergarten students, which meant the only way you're ever going to get an awesome number is if you have a lot of non-proficient kids. So you'll see that's 2022. And I had to have them teach me how they calculated that, because that's not how I would calculate what that sentence says. So on that bottom section, you can see that I might recommend that we not use the way that was calculated and move to a more robust thing that actually shows us that we're closing that achievement gap, and just take the number of kids who make that growth and divide it by the non-proficient kindergarten students, because you can see, like, we did amazing things last year. I never want to discount it. But we also knew we had made amazing growth pre-pandemic with our kids, and you can see that 64.2% of our kindergarten students, even though this just says 24% with their calculation, grew 1 achievement level or more, which was even higher than our 63.8% this year, which is still phenomenal. But I had that moment of, we're good, but we outperformed. How did this calculation turn out this way? And so once I finally got to the bottom of it, I was like, I'm going to take the time to explain it to you that I might recommend we keep this amazing metric. We just need to calculate it correctly so it calculates what it actually says it's going to calculate. That's okay.
Your recommendation is not to do
that top line.
Not do the top line.
No, the only way you'll ever get a higher number is if you have a lot of non-proficient kids and then move them.
And that's just not what we would want.
That's not what I would want for us to start with either. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it'll make sense when you turn the page and you get to see another one of my tables. I tried to make it easy for goal setting here. If you need to,
How many certificates do you have at Idaho?
I don't have a single one. I've never taken the time to get one.
I feel like we just do all of this.
So again, you may want to highlight that actual NSD Performance 2022, and then that last column, which is that NSD Performance Target, just so it kind of helps you see where we looked at that. So once again, you'll see the ones in blue are the ones the state requires that we do, and the one at the bottom is that local metric that we chose. And I hope I explained why, when we get down to the bottom one, why it looks a little different. But when we look at the percent of students who score proficient on the Kinder Spring IRI, we really wanted to look at closing that gap between our 58.1% and the state 64.8% over 3 years, because we really would like to match the state proficiency. It just is going to take us some time to get caught up to them. Obviously, we're making tremendous growth with our kids, and I don't want to discount that, but how do we help close that proficiency spring goal? And we're on the right track, right? Because we grew more than the state. I think in 3 years we might be able to get there. And so as the administration was discussing, we really looked at those first 4 lines you see there, the kinder, the first, the second, and the third, and did that 3-year calculation for that performance target. Thoughts on keeping that as our goals, or would you like to do a different way of calculating out those goals?
I think what you're doing is great. It looks good.
Is that a shaking your head a no, or?
That's it, I was a yes.
The word calculate scared me.
Yeah,
That's-
it's a calculations that you're proficient at. You guys have talked about this, and you're explaining to the point where I kind of understand what's going on. But I still feel like I don't have much of a say in this because you guys are the experts, and I'm trusting a lot of this and you know what I mean? And your explanation. So I'm good with it because of that. That's all I'm gonna say.
What I like to see in here, and it doesn't necessarily show it, but after your explanation and looking at it, is the growth, is the progress is more important to me than the final number.
Yes.
I mean, the final number, the data, the stakeholders, all that, I get all that stuff, but it's the progress. And if we're beating the pants off of the state numbers, but at the end of the day, we don't quite get there, I'm okay with it, because that progress is huge.
If we continue to grow more than the state, we will eventually meet
Yeah,
the
we'll get there.
proficiency numbers.
We'll
It
get
just
there.
takes time.
I so agree with you.
I can speak to one thing. I worked with Anita for a long time, and she's never steered me wrong. So I appreciate the trust comment. She's as detail oriented as you can get, and she does a phenomenal job. So.
Every person that I've known named Anita.
Oh, good.
Is that your wife's name?
Is that your wife's
Is that your
name?
wife's name?
Oh, no, that's Carrie. I'm sorry, but that's another level of perfection.
So that was the first, I have
That
no
was making
transition
assumptions. I
dance.
apologize for the, got off track. Bring us
Okay,
back,
I'm bringing
Anita.
us back. So that was those, that kinder, first, second, third. They also require then, remember how we talked about ISAT score proficiency and growth for our 6th and 8th graders? They also require that we then look at our proficiency in 4th grade ELA, ISAT only, not in math, and then adequate growth on grade 4 ELA, because that's part of their early literacy plan. And so you'll notice that there are those dashes in those last 2 blue rows, because we don't have that state accountability data, but we use the same calculations that we talked about for 6th and 8th grade in those last 2 grades. Does that make sense? Feel comfortable sticking with that for 4th grade? Okay. And then that last item is that local metric. And I may have just taken the assumption that once I explained the math to you, you would be okay switching to that other way of calculating. And so in here, it just doesn't make sense, the second column, because our goal was 30%, but it was based off the unique calculation.
Right.
And we're just gonna report that we set it as 30%, and we totally killed it, right? 63.8. But I will also make sure to get the copy of this to understand why our goal was maybe a little lower than it should have been last year, just because it was a different calculation. And then, of course, we don't get that state performance. And as we looked at that, since we didn't have that, we thought 63.8 is pretty amazing. We wonder if we could get to 65. We talked about 66 and aiming for 2/3 of our non-proficient kids making that growth. So we thought that might be a little lofty, so we went with that 65. But it's
65%.
Yeah, it's kind of when the goals always look different than what it was before.
But you do this one more time, and that goal is gonna be like 135%. Cause that's a trajectory you're on.
I hope so. Okay, okay. We've now made it through the early literacy plan, guys. We're still cruising. Okay, so the next piece that our board has historically, and we have shrunk and grown this over the last few years. Last year it made it to its smallest list of items, so I say that to you with a smile, but I just want to remind you once again, this is based off our state accountability data that we do not have access to. But it really looks at, and this is the one time I'm gonna tell you that we're now gonna talk about like golf scores. You want a lower golf score than a higher golf score, right? When we talk about subgroup gaps, that really looks at the gap from, so for example, our Hispanic students compared to our white students, what's that gap? And are we shrinking the gap, the performance gap between those two groups? 2 or more races, are we shrinking that gap between those groups in both ELA and math? So we really wanna look at, in a perfect world, right, there would be no performance gap between our race ethnicities, right? But we really wanted, as a district, to focus on shrinking those gaps. And so we used the same calculations. I did handwrite on every one of your copies because I made a typo in the bottom grid, so I apologize. But I somehow didn't change the rest of the years and caught it after I made all your copies this morning. But since we don't have our performance data, we went off the same calculation of trying to close the gap to the state. Only that didn't work because we actually outperformed the state and have a smaller gap in some of our areas. And so we did some unique, and so as we talked about it, I actually just remembered, and as the administration talked about it, we really wanted to look at getting back to our pre-pandemic data, I believe was our goal. Is that, yes, I'm seeing head nods, so I didn't make that up. So we really looked at how could we help get back to our pre-pandemic performance in those areas. So we'd like to shrink our math gap, Hispanic, Latino to white to 14%, 2 or more races in math to 7.6. Our Hispanic, Latino ELA gap to 18%, and our ELA gap 2 or more races down to 4.8%. And so again, you'll notice all of those numbers are lower than your first column, but this is the one time you want those numbers to be lower than your first column because it's like golf, you want the lowest score you can get. Does that make sense? Oh, you guys are.
Well, when you say 2 or more races, what is, because you have Hispanic, Latino, and then 2 or more races.
We have to use the federal race and ethnicity code. So if you're Hispanic or Latino, that's the category you even if you have other races attached to that, that's still that trump. That's like kind of like that trump card that holds by itself. And then if you put that you're white and American Indian, now you're in 2 race categories. You can have up to all 5 race categories.
So it's just identifying Hispanic and Latino with everything else, everybody else.
Yep, that's separate, and then 2 or more races. And we have, of course, students that are Asian, Black, African American. But the unique thing about that is we don't have a large enough subgroup at grade levels or across the board for it to be a reportable data. So it's usually redacted from all of our data. Those are the only 2 subgroups that are large enough for us to
So
not.
can I say why I think I don't agree with this data?
I don't.
Let me just give you my point of view on this. And I know I'll probably get a nasty email, so I'll speak loudly.
Well, don't invite it.
No, I have no problems with it. To me, it seems like it's better to calculate lower income people, I guess,
Not color.
Socioeconomic.
I don't like it,
because it's just
but it's a statement.
the measurement of race. To me, I know we have a large amount of Hispanics, but I know also that we have a large amount of humans, okay? If we treat every human the same, which is how everybody wants to be treated, and not separate races, but instead separate income levels, I think we'll be able to get almost, because I was looking at that first chart in the beginning where it talked about, I can't remember where it's at, where he talked about people that were economically disadvantaged, right? And it's almost like almost to the T identical to the Hispanic or Latino. So to me, having that will capture more of all the races than having to specifically set our sights on one specific race. And that way we're treating humanity as it is. That's my feeling, unless the government says we have to measure this.
Nope, this is a locally chosen metric. So previous school boards have wanted this subgroup, and they used to have LEP in it, or LEP in this subgroup, and they used to have economically disadvantaged, and they even at some point had special education in 504 kids, but over the years they've whittled it down to this subgroup. That's the.
Was there a reason behind that? From the previous year?
Sure they shared.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
I don't like it.
I agree, Marco. People are people. People learn differently. They are in different. But if we're tracking ISAT math over all the students, it's going to change those numbers a little bit. But I think we set the goal for all the students rather than break that
Like
apart
color.
into grades.
I don't like
I think it just
broken down by
exacerbates
the
the issue.
division.
What do you think, Dr. Russell? I mean, you were here when this numbers was, or this was set probably.
Yeah, poverty has the greatest impact on student achievement. Language does as well. I mean, language is an important indicator of it. I'm happy to do an economically disadvantaged one. I think that's one that affects everyone, whether whatever race you are. So if the board would choose to do that and support that, happy to support either goal, however you guys would like to put it. But we'll still look at it. We're still going to look at how our Hispanic students are doing, and it's something that we'll just want to be aware of.
But why though? I mean, I guess.
Part to see if our ELL programs are making a difference.
So it's the language
What's ELL?
more than
English
anything.
language.
Language
So-
learner,
Yeah,
English language
because,
learner.
So-
and the language covers more than just Hispanics for all those
It
people
does,
that come
sure.
from
Yeah.
UP,
Sure.
all
Yeah.
these different countries. So, and that's a measurable, I think, would be important too, because then it focuses on a specific group of people that are having, or not race, but people that are struggling in a specific area. And I really support that.
So I like economic, and I had put non-English speaking students. I do think that that's an important metric because our ELA, English language.
ELL.
Thank you,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Because I do think that we need to know if those are effective because that's the
Huge
language.
portion of it.
Yeah, but that's what I put. I actually agree. I had put, my question was performance gaps. How do we remove them with non-English speaking students?
Yes.
I went to the gym and I was surprised how many people were speaking some European language.
Oh, there's a lot of
Kids.
There's a lot of Romanian,
Romanian.
Oh my
a lot of
goodness.
Eastern European.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So glad to remove those four, ISAT, math, and ELA gaps. Do you want to keep graduation rate Hispanic Latino? Because we do his graduation rate and LEP rate. We calculate both of those, but we don't have to have them as metrics because they're just chosen metrics. I mean, I can still glad to display
LEP is?
limited English proficiency.
Thank
is
you,
actually the-
thank you. That's why I was like,
We
NES
don't
isn't a word, but
We don't
I.
use ELL as much as we use limited English proficiency now.
But
They mean the same.
ESL is another over here, which was English as a second
what I'm-
language, so like,
that's
yeah,
what I'm
there's,
familiar with.
And
So
that
much
makes
real
sense
aberrations.
because that's a group of people that is different than a specific race. Personally,
The graduation rates for,
Because we have, on this page, we have Hispanic and Latino, and then when we get to access testing for our ELL students or LEP students, we'll talk about it again, because we actually have graduation rate for LEP in there as well, but that is in our limited English
I
proficiency.
still would go with graduation rate for lower income levels as compared to graduation rate.
That's why I always include it, even though we don't necessarily have a goal, I always include that data, because I think it's.
That's what I would suggest with
So
that.
are you saying there's an extra funding or programs for the language barrier students probably from the government?
Yeah, we have an LEP plan that we perform, and our students, there's a state assessment that they move on. So yeah,
I
we
think
do.
it'd be good to have that, so we can see that the needs there and that it's working, the progress or what, but I think as far as color of skin, I think it should be.
And I don't wanna undervalue Hispanics or Latinos. I don't wanna make it seem like I'm trying to not notice them. I believe that this is what we want. We want to feel equal. We want to feel like we are all worth the same. And to do that, we have to be measured the same. That's how I feel.
So I would be glad to do an ISAT LEP gap, so rather than getting rid of this page entirely, when we get our accountability data, I'll include that LEP gap. I would just maybe caution us about this year picking up the economically disadvantaged for ISAT. We're in a really unique situation, and so just to explain, remember, we've been on free lunch for everyone for a few years under COVID. And unfortunately, this last year, really unique situation, at first the state was gonna count any kid who had a 2019 free and reduced lunch application and any directly certified student. So any kid that becomes community eligible for foster care or food stamps or other things that allows them to be direct cert. They were gonna calculate both, and then they decided at the last minute to only count direct certified kids from last year. And so our count of kids will be so dramatically different that I think it would be unfair to set a goal based off of a smaller count of kids that will be a much larger group of kids once we finish all of the applications this year. Does that make sense? And so this might not be the year to add that, but after this year and we finish, I would be glad to include a
So
forward thinking goal, but we can delete all of this and just add the LEP gap.
Okay.
And then,
Sounds great.
and then next year, I would really encourage us to add that. I just don't think the data is.
And then one more time, limited English proficiency, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Now, why would you need the gap with the low income? Why would you need that division? Is there certain programs for that as well?
Title
There
I was
are,
raised
there's
very
Title
poor, and I
One.
did fine. Wouldn't want that. But you tell me if there's programs and you're
Sure.
getting money.
Yeah, no, there's a large
I
amount of
wanna know
funding.
the reason.
There's funding through that, but also poverty has a great impact upon the achievement of students. And so whether our funding is making an impact on those students and it's going to the students to benefit them, it's going to the families to benefit them. Our community resource schools, our FCRCs, our McKinney-Vento, all of those programs go to support those families and want to make sure those programs are supported to
Okay.
close that loop.
That's
Yep.
understandable.
Yep.
Thank you for that clarity.
So I'm gonna cross, basically this page 10 is gonna go, I'm gonna cross those items off here, but we're gonna add back in ISAT LEP gap. Unless, once we do the access part in here in a minute, you decide you want to not do that, which we can also do, but for now, I wrote that down and we'll add that in with the data, and you'll see on this very front page that we haven't hardly referenced, I will cross off all of those sections and add in the LEP, so this document will change when I get it.
Thank you.
Feeling okay about that page now? Not sure, everything's alright. Again, those were locally chosen metrics, so we have the ability to say no. Okay, so we turn the page to page 11. It's the last section, you guys, of this part. Then we still have the whole second part of the CIP. I know, I'm sorry, I'm trying. So as we jump into this, it's really important to us to look at our limited English proficiency kids and our English learners. And every one of our K-12 kids have to take part in an assessment every year. It's in January and February each year. And our kids have to participate in this exam to show us their proficiency level in the English language. And it's called the Access Test. And if you're curious, that's in the notes up here. It's Assessing Comprehension and Communication in English State to State is what Access stands for. And all of our kids that are LEP 1, so that first year in the country receiving English instruction, those students actually get an exemption from our state exams that year in ELA. So they don't participate in our ISAT. So that's sometimes why we don't look at ISAT LEP gap, because all of our LEP 1 students don't participate in the ELA ISAT. Does that make sense? Because it's their first year in the country and this test replaces it. So keep that in mind when we finish this, if you still want to keep your ISAT LEP gap goals, okay? Math might still be a really good one because even our LEP 1 students have to take the math assessment, but just keep that in mind. And in case you're looking at me going, what exactly does the Access Test test? They have a reading section, a writing section, a listening, and a speaking. And what they do is they give and they have exit criteria on how our kids perform on this Access Test to exit limited English proficiency services. So that's how they determine if the kid continues to be eligible for those services or not. It's calculated really uniquely because you have to meet a proficiency level of 4.2, and so I'm in the second paragraph on page 11. You have to get a proficiency level of 4.2 or higher on the overall score category. And then you have to get a 3.5 or higher in listening, reading, and writing. And in speaking, you just had to have taken it because you can't, as long as you complete it, you can't get lower than a 1. So speaking has been nationally not our strongest area, and partly because those kids have to record their voice into a device, and I don't know about you, but how many of you like to hear your own voice recorded? It's not necessarily the greatest indicator of our kids' speaking ability, in my opinion, sorry. But even the state agreed because it no longer became a really important component. It is important, though, to note that it's still included in that overall score, because it's 35% reading, 35% writing, 15% listening, and 15% speaking. We had 1,742 students taking the Access 2.0 last year, and we had 132 of our kids meet the exit criteria in 2022, and that's very exciting. That means they hit that 4.2 in all of those subcategories, and so we actually exit and then get to monitor them to make sure that they continue to make progress for the years, is it 3 years after?
Three,
Exit 1,
yes.
exit 2, exit 3, yes.
Yep.
And so we do make sure that we still monitor those kids. But those are some of the data points that in the past boards have been really excited to see how our kids have done. So now we're gonna go.
That's 132 students out of the
1,007, yep. Yep. And so if we look at that and kind of jump down into the chart, you'll see that listening section has historically been our strongest subtest. Our kids can listen with the best of them and perform very high in that area. And so they do well in that category, but you can see that pre-COVID, now in case you're wondering, 2020 was not pre-COVID. Remember, they take this test in January and February, right before we sent them home in March of 2020. So that's still a really good indicator of how our kids were doing pre-pandemic. So that's why I still kept that 3 years of data in there. And so as you look at that, our listening still continues to be our biggest strength, but you can see that we've still had a dip from that pre-pandemic in helping to get our kids there. I included speaking, even though you know that it's not as big a category, but I just wanted you to see it continues not to be a strength of our kids to perform on the speaking test. And then if you turn the page, you can see the reading, writing, and overall categories. And we really, if you look at how this is set up, and it's easier on this page because the categories are a little smaller, we really want to look at that 6, which is reaching, that 5 that is bridging, and that 4 that's expanding, so we're 4.2 or higher, and that's how we kind of looked at what that proficiency. Do we have more kids scoring in those 3 highest levels than the other levels? And you can see that we have not gotten back to our 2020 performance, our pre-pandemic performance. And writing continues to be one of those areas that we are struggling in and need to do some extra work and focus in. And so as I say that to you, I know that was a very quick summary, and normally I would have been a little more detailed, but hopefully you can see how the bar graph works. And yes, I'm seeing lots of head nodding, okay. And so as we looked at this, and this is again a locally chosen metric that was really important to our boards in the past to look at access testing. We wanted to go ahead and last year they got rid of speaking because they didn't feel as though it was a great indicator based on some of our conversation. I completely agree. That's why you won't see speaking on the list. But they really wanted to look at listening, reading, and writing, and then that exiting, which is that the kids that you calculated, and my math is still right?
No, because I put it in there wrong, so
Oh.
I can't even do math on my calculator.
I was like, man, it would be embarrassing if that number's wrong. I know I checked it 18 times, but.
No, I trust your math.
But as we look at these numbers here, the really unique thing is we have historically, especially pre-pandemic, outperformed the state. And it's tough because we continue to outperform the state in some of our categories. And so we didn't use our handy dandy formula, which was closing the gap to the state, because we outperformed the state in some of our areas, and that threw us off on how to best calculate it. And so as the administration talked about it, we wanted to not even include the state in our consideration. We wanted to get back to our pre-pandemic 2020 numbers. And so we are trying to get back to that 2020 data in a 3-year period. And so not calculated to the state, because that didn't make sense, because we would have to do worse in some of them. But we went ahead and looked at how do we close that gap to get back to where we were before the pandemic. So that's where those targets come from in that last column there. Except for the exiting, because exiting is really tough, right? Because it's kind of that variable of how many kids, even if they make growth, we don't always get to that proficiency level. So we kind of went with an 8% change. But we can change it to whatever you would like.
Looks good to
Looks-
me.
Yeah, I think it looks good too. I think that speaking is the hardest, especially just because accents, embarrassment, I just think speaking. And when we say, co-teaching and like class immersion has a lot to do with this, I know I just love co-teaching.
Yes.
I
Co-teaching
write it
is-
all over everything, all my papers say co-teaching, co-teaching, co-teaching. Okay, that's what I thought, 'cause I've watched it in practice in the elementary schools and it's absolutely amazing, some of the things that they do. And just that immersion and like, oh my gosh, when I was in school, it just wasn't that way. And so I think that it just caused huge barriers for, non-English speakers. And now with the way that we co-teach and the immersion, I just think it's killer.
So our co-teaching program is, it's highlight other school districts come and see from us. The state of Idaho is asked to come and help us train the state
Yeah.
because of how successful it's been. But just to, again, share how detrimental COVID was because of the lack of subs, because of the illness, the co-teacher was usually one of the first pulled out. So the kids weren't getting the access to the co-teaching because that teacher was covering another class and things. So it just, we feel, again, staying healthy, we stay healthy again. We got the plans to be able to get us back into that state average, and we feel that we can do that given the amount of time.
To be performing well above the state. is
Yeah,
what would
I
like
know,
to
I
add.
just- I feel like-
Back to our expectation,
Yeah.
where we're outperforming the state, where
Yeah.
the state is expecting Napa, come train us on how you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because you're doing it so well.
Well, and Heidi Ron gave that to me, so I was able to read the whole thing that, from both her and Heather, and it was just amazing. It was I just love it. I love co-teaching.
You'll see that we have that graduation rate for LEP on that bottom line. And we had been outperforming the state, if you remember back to our very first page in LEP performance, and we're not there, but we want to get back there. So that one is closing the achievement gap to the state in that area in years. And believe it or not, our LEP department has actually gone back through because we had so many kids who were working full time when we were closed. And they've been trying to go back and trying to reconnect with each one of those kids. And they requested lists of those kids from all the 4 cohort years. Think of how many years the kids were talking who disappeared and didn't return, so that they could try and reconnect and try and get them back. And I'm not going to say that we're going to meet this goal, but I am sure optimistic that we can get back there. I know they've done a lot of work to try and reconnect them to our schools.
To make one other connection with the challenges of graduation rate, with what's going on in Ukraine and the number of refugees, we're gonna have kids come in that, like, their clock's gonna start and there's no way they can be a graduate on time for us, that we have a duty to help them get graduated and stuff. So just to be aware of that context, of those are some of the challenges that cause these numbers to look different than just, hey, you got 8 out of 10. It's not that simple, so.
Just heard today, 8 to 10 families a month moving in, not necessarily to Napa, just in the Treasure Valley. So, I mean, it's a consistent flow. That's
Yep.
going on.
And they bring a lot of kids, bro.
They bring their children for sure.
Well, if I was schooling, I'd bring my whole family.
You said a lot of kids.
Yeah, little kids, right?
I heard you, Mark.
My whole family.
Just the parents are coming.
Yeah.
to the state.
Yeah.
No, I'm good at those numbers.
I'm
Those target percentages.
So
Okay.
what I will bring you on Monday, this is only the first half, I'm sorry, there's still one more whole section, I just didn't give you the papers.
Can we take a little break?
Really,
or-
we can take a break first though, but I just wanna remind you, on Monday, what will be in your board packet, as soon as I can get it ready, is I will just plug in those performance targets and take out the sections we talked about, and add in anything I can. And I will also do my best to update this with the requests on some of those sections, just noting that the ISAT data will still be missing for all of those. And, if you'd like, I'm also glad to update this packet once we get our state ISAT, data. And so, because again, this is one of the requirements. Okay? Okay?
Okay,
Shall we take a,
now let's take a break.
and then I'll hand out papers for
Be
the
back when the red hand gets on the 3.
statute last year that we add this component into our continuous improvement plan. And so I got the pleasure of trying to figure out how we calculate it in a district our size. It was approved by the State Board of Education last year, our plan, so I used it as the template for this year, so hopefully it will save us some time and effort. Now, I gave you 3 pieces of paper. One is this little statute that I apologize, the copy machine does not seem to have made a great copy of it. And then I gave you one that says 21-22, and then the other one that says 22-23. If you want to help yourself, the one we'll spend the most time on is the 22-23. That's the one I'm gonna highlight, so I know which one to look at here when I'm talking. And it helps if the one's a blank at the end. So this is the one we'll probably spend the most time on. But I wanted to help you see how the board worked through this last year and what they decided in their process. And so the first thing is the new requirement is that we have to look at our staff performance data, and every year our staff, which is why I gave you the statute in case you were like, we're talking about the CIP, why are there 2 statutes attached? This one is all about the definitions and things about measurable student achievement that are required in our teacher evaluation. So every teacher and every administrator has to have a measurable student achievement goal as a part of their piece. So if you look towards the bottom of the statute here, number 18, you will see that there is a list of categories that start on the front side and actually roll all the way to the back side, that are all the categories that folks can pick an assessment, student performance goal, or a measurable student achievement goal underneath those categories. So it's everything from the ISAT, so Idaho Standard Achievement Test, to teacher constructed assessments of student growth, to college entrance exam. There's a whole list of things that folks can pick. The really important part, and why this is one of the more unique things we've ever been asked to include in the CIP, is that it is also written in a statute that teacher and administrator get to, that the teacher gets to have a say and pick their own performance goal. So they can choose to monitor 10 kids in their class on whatever particular performance goal, or they can choose to monitor all of their math classes if they're a high school teacher, right? It completely depends on what individualized goal they select for their measurable student achievement. Really interesting then that we're supposed to also report out to how our set goals on these performance goals when it could be very different. So I want you to even think of my IRI example. If I'm a kindergarten teacher and I want to focus on my non-proficient kids and growing them a category, it's very different than if the kindergarten teacher across the hall, maybe she also chooses IRI, but she just wants to increase her percent proficient. Do you see how those 2 assessments or those 2 data points are no longer comparable at that point? And we're supposed to use percentages. It has caused it to be a very unique calculation. So in our infinite wisdom, as we worked through this with the board last year, we looked at every one of our employee evaluations, or teacher evaluations, and looked at their measurable goal, because we have to categorize whatever goal they pick into one of these categories for their measurable student achievement categories. And so we have each of these listed, right? We look at whatever, like that IRI goal I gave you, would fall under that F, Idaho Reading Indicator, which will be one of the required assessment tools for applicable staff, right? So that falls underneath that category. And whether it be that I'm going to work on my non-proficient kids or move all of whatever their goal is with IRI, it gets slotted into that category because it's related to IRI. Does that make sense? Remembering that teachers have a lot of voice and choice in this, right? They can pick something different every year. Yet we have to compare and set a goal for next year, knowing that they may not even pick the same performance goal next year. Everyone with me? Super muddy. Okay, so what we did, if you look at the 21-22, the one you didn't highlight, what we did last year is we went through, and you can see that in the first column, we have the grade level. So what grade level of teachers picked that? So it could be everything from a pre-K teacher to a 12th grade teacher. And then how many certified staff selected that component, and then what that performance metric is. So percent of students taught by staff in this grade or grade band and subject group that meet measurable student achievement targets or success indicators of the assessment tool, formative assessments.
So just, sorry, to be fully clear, the teacher picks their own performance indicator.
Yes, with the principal every year as a part of their
So
evaluation.
59 staff,
Yep.
59 teachers chose that one.
They just
Yes.
pick one.
And they pick one,
And 59, pick this
picked formative assessments.
one.
Okay, and you can see 59 picked formative assessments, 207 selected teacher constructed assessment of student growth, 207 picked pre and post test, and you can kind of just see how we set that out. what we then did is we calculated some standard measures of a number of things. We gave the range and we gave the median. And interestingly enough, this is what we posted, but we also gave them the mode, the most frequently occurring data point. And then we did something you should never do mathematically. We tried to average averages. You should never do that. We know that that is poor math. And so we actually removed that because remember, we have math teachers on our board. And so we were like, you're right. We knew when we did it, it was bad math, but here we go. And last year, I just wanted you to see that the board decided to go based off the median score. And then what they decided to do for performance targets was, as long as it was over 70, well, I think that's a true statement, as long as it was over 75%, that was the lowest they allowed it to go. They just made that the goal because they knew that next year it would be completely different teachers in each of these piles, right? We're no longer measuring apples to apples with apples to oranges and trying to then make, so that was how the board chose to do this last year. So now that we're gonna look at that one you highlighted, the 22, 23 with all the blanks on the side. I also just need you to know the statute changed. And so some of them were removed. So if I remember correctly, formative assessments is no longer a category that a teacher could pick from because the statute changed. But they did add in student learning objectives, I think is one of the new ones they added. So the statutes changed on us. So we can't even necessarily compare across the board because it was no longer an allowable category. And so.
And when does the teacher pick this?
In the fall, as a part of their start of the year evaluation process, you indicate who your evaluator is, and then you set your performance goal for the year.
Buildings are actually in the process of that right now. Administrators will be meeting with teachers between now and the middle of October, formulating what those goals are.
And how many do they pick? Only one.
What's the time frame for assessment?
So this is the tricky part. You also have to have your evaluation completed in May. And so if you pick a data point that isn't going to be available to you, that makes that really difficult to complete your evaluation process. So it's.
I don't even have a word.
Oh, Brooke.
I don't even have a word for what you just said. I
Is
just
this
been
just
trying
because
so
this is
hard.
like government?
This is government, this would be the
That's why.
definition of government overreach.
Our state elected
Yes,
official.
yes, that's why.
You need
Oh my
to
God.
government. It's government.
It sounds ludicrous. I mean, it really does.
Yes, it does.
I think I understand the impetus behind it, the reasoning behind it, but then again, what they're talking about is the dome in Boise and what is in reality in the classrooms is, there's a huge disconnect.
I think it connects with what Trustee Valley said earlier, tying those things. Educators want to do that. They want to be held accountable for the growth of their students. But this really convolutes how do we track the growth of our students?
Well, and there's so many of our patrons and teachers that just say, man, if we could just teach.
Yeah.
If we didn't have all the encumbrances of tests, all these tests and these assessments, boom, boom, boom. I get it now.
Yep.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we've got to
Yep.
do it, but I totally understand where some of these.
And this is fairly new. I mean, this came
New
out
last year, we
last
had to
year.
come up with.
It was.
Well,
Next time somebody asks me where they should spend their time, it's gonna be writing in about this.
There you go.
That's what I'm
There you
gonna
go.
say. So, sorry,
all right.
I'm-
Okay. And there's also a rule attached to it that you have to have a group of 5 or more people. And so just so you know, in last year, there were 6 staff not accounted for. That's impressive, just so you know. It was
There you
only
go.
6 people who picked something that didn't have a group of 5 or more out of that list of categories I showed you, which of course was a different list a year ago, but you kind of understand. And I apologize, I realized I didn't put that notes in here, and I will include it. But I feel like it was less than 6 this year that didn't fall into a group of 5 or more, and I will add that for Monday's meeting with that notes section, as I can't believe I skipped that on the second page.
So as far as the timeline, you mentioned they have to, by May, so basically they got the whole year to complete this. That falls within whenever the administrators can get there and this, okay, so it's a whole year.
So you can see that in our new 22-23, I went ahead and put every category. There are some times when it was not applicable because last year, for example, I didn't have enough people pick ISAT because you don't get the data soon enough to be able to use it as your goal most often. And this year we did have 9 certified staff pick ISAT though, that's exciting.
Those must be the new people.
Who don't, I don't
The new
know.
teachers.
Because remember, you get some autonomy in that, so.
It was option A, it was option A.
Yeah.
You're right, they put one reader.
It was a,
And then what I did was, the results median, that performance target, I had to share what our performance target was for the year before. And even though our median was our choice, I didn't want you to feel like I made you say you had to pick median. But so I did put those, the range, median, and mode. And then you can see for our 21-22 results, that's actually how we did in each of those groups, with that 21-22, results at the end of that evaluation.
because I'm still trying to catch up from what you said, just because this is just so ludicrous, honestly. But are you saying that, which one is the reported number of how we did the median?
So the reason the board
Because I'm
picked
seeing the
that.
21-22 results, just tell me where to look here.
So we could look at range, median, or mode. I will say median was approved by the State Board of Education in our plan last year. So if we want ease of use on this section of the plan, you may pick median again, and you may choose to go with what the board decided last year, which was as long as the median was over 75%, whatever we got this year was our goal for next year, because it won't even be the same group of people who select that goal next year. That's how the board decided last year. Whatever you think, I am glad to do whatever you would like. We could switch to mode, which is the most frequently occurring, but you'll see that 100% tends to be our most. So we didn't feel like as a board, as a board and admin team last year, that was the best choice. But I wanted to give you options so you didn't feel like I just said.
I'm gonna go for median.
I was just
Me
gonna
too.
say the same thing.
Sounds good.
I mean,
I'm gonna go with the advice of.
median.
median.
The median would be
Yeah.
When
easiest
you
to
look
work
at
with.
the previous numbers, I mean, they were hitting those targets pretty much.
And what I will do then is if you say go with median and just keep it the same as our 21-22 performance for next year, but as long as you're clear that the reason we did that is because we knew it would be a completely different group of people. And we don't usually look at completely different groups of people when we do data, but it was the best we could come up with. And I will include also that notes of how many staff were not included. I just missed the last thought, so.
What do you think, Dr. Russell?
To me, it's the easiest. It was approved. I would worry about it not being approved and having to be sent back to us and having to spend more time and coming back to another meeting and say, this wasn't approved.
Median
I can
sounds-
say a lot, I can say a lot more, but I'll
One less
leave it at that.
I like that.
Median seems the most fair.
Yeah, it just does, especially what you're giving us, and especially because they're fixing the bonds and they're due by May, and then it might not even be an indicator that we're looking at.
There's no way they can change it.
Yeah.
Like halfway through the year and they go, they changed my.
There is some conversation with administrators and things you can adapt some of that, but
Case by case.
correct. Typically you don't want that happening because how you're developing your instructional plan and what that looks like, you should be working towards that goal.
And
Sure.
But we have had instances of something changing. In my experience, I've only had that like 2 or 3 people that we've talked about, their mid-year check-in changing their goal. Like,
I got
to give that as a-
First year teacher coming in.
Yep.
and just they don't teach us in
I-
school.
the-
I went through the teacher education program,
Yep.
but.
those 9 folks that chose, I said it, that would be a mid-year conversation I would have, or a beginning-year conversation I
But
would
they
have.
also can look at individual results
Correct.
in 10 days of
Yeah,
them
that's true.
completing both assessments. So they may have,
Yep.
like, their goal may be something that allows them to look at it more closely than we're giving them credit for, right?
To be
So what I will put together for the packet is, this one all edited and filled in the last column. This one, I think I will leave the 2021 results as is, but just add in that median for that. And then I'm gonna make some updates to this document to reflect some of the changes we made, and I'm gonna take the word draft off of it, knowing that ISAT data will still be old data. But those should be the pieces, and then I will add some narrative language. I didn't wanna write narrative language to something that you may remove from this plan, so there are some required narrative things that I will put some data, or I'll put some writing into in this document, so it will be a little bit longer than what you're seeing here, but that will be the documents for the packet for, Monday for that.
Can you indicate what you add in some way so I don't have to reread it?
Like highlight it.
Or
I
just
can
let
do
us
that
know?
for you.
Thank you.
I was like, I want the pretty one for the, cause that's the one that'll get posted to our
Fair.
website, so.
Totally fair.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So Monday we're voting on it. Monday we're voting on
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say, so this SIP plan will come to us for an action item on approve or disapprove. And we're hoping that this work here is gonna put us at about a 3-minute action item.
Yeah.
Sorry, 3 minutes of.
3 minutes.
And if you have further questions, please reach out to Anita. She's happy to answer, sit down with you.
Thank you, Nina.
Okay. All right, is that,
Thank you.
Executive session.
all right,
Oh, shoot.
yeah, we need to,
Okay. I move that we move into executive session to consider the evaluation, dismissal, or disciplining of, or hear complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, individual owner, or public student, records exempt from disclosure, and B, records exempt from disclosure as provided in chapter 1, title 74, Idaho Code.
I have a motion, and it's been seconded, move into executive session, roll call,
Chairman Kirkland,
yes.
trustee Pearson, trustee, Taylor,
Aye.
trustee Valier,
And then,
Just clarification, is trustee Simpson going to be online for the executive
I
session?
don't believe so, I didn't,
and then do we need to go ahead and let them stop the streaming? Cause can't we, or
they're
will
gonna,
we have to come back out here
we have
too?
to come back out
Okay.
here.
So we're watching the room.
Thank you, have a good evening. Thank you, Anita.
Letters there.
Monday.
You need help with anything?
Anita,
That would be very nice.
okay.
I think that.
No, I don't, but I really love that you have.
I'll run it by you before I participate.
Beautiful, thank you so much.
Extra copies, access here.
These are my notes, right?
Yep.
I just got these are my notes and then I can put it in the bottom.
Yeah, those are, what do you need here? Do we just shred this?
Yes. Please, then it will end up back with my stuff.
Okay, we're done there. That's been torn, so
Okay.
don't use it. Good work.
That computer though.
They have to come back and do that, so I can leave it up.
Greg, are you in executive session?
You're out. Let's text Cody. I think Cody's doing it remotely. Yeah, I think he is doing it remotely, so. Good. Do you need help carrying anything to your office? Anita?
No, thank you.
Do you get a second? Yeah. I do. I read through the emails on teaching, learning, kind of that. That's great, actually. It was kind of on my list anyway.
Yeah, I'll be right up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and try to reach out to Brian. Okay, I'll follow it on. I can schedule it. If we can't do this schedule, then I'll probably reach out. I'll be around.
Okay,
Adjourned.
we are adjourned
Thank you.
at 8:03 PM. Oh, sorry, 8:07 PM.
I got it.
I'm not gonna let, you're not gonna